City Council Rail Committee of October 19th, 2022 to order. We'll get started. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Cormack?
Here.
Mayor Burt?
Here.
Chair Koo?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to start with oral communications on anything that is not on the agenda. Do we have anybody?
Yes, Chair, we do. We have one person so far, and the first one is Layla Modaris. And you can unmute and speak for up to 3 minutes.
Hold on. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Layla Modaris. I've been a resident of Palo Alto for 7 years. I currently live at 101 Alma Street in Palo Alto. This is right near the Caltrain location. And it's been a noise that has been bothering most residents that I'm aware of, as well as myself, for several years. It's unusually loud, and I've had to leave my home several times to be able to just hear myself think. So I'm glad to hear, I guess, there's some kind of effort to be done to reevaluate the loudness of that noise that comes in this area every few minutes. So I'd be grateful to hear and understand how we can address this and help create a more peaceful environment for the residents that are here.
Okay, thank you for your comments. The next speaker we have is Adrian Brandt. You can unmute and speak for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you. I wanted to comment on the presentation this committee received at what I believe was your last meeting from Caltrain regarding the San Francisco Creek Bridge project and the need for it to be replaced, I guess, sooner than anyone realized. I did review the video, and I wanted to state that I want to emphatically urge both Caltrain and yourselves to pursue a shoe fly, which I believe a prefab shoe fly could be dropped in on the El Camino side of the existing bridge structure. There's, I believe, Member Burt and others asked Caltrain staff to comment on it, and I don't think you ever received a clear answer. It was sort of a confused, muddled answer having to do with some evaporation pond or something that didn't quite make sense, and I don't think we ever got a clear answer, but I think they did indicate they were looking into it. The suggestion of shutting down the service across that bridge area and shuttling people on buses for up to 2 years is a complete non-starter. Speaking as a member of the Caltrain Advisory Committee, and so that's going to be a disaster. So they really absolutely have to figure out how to drop a temporary prefab shoe fly bridge in adjacent to the existing bridge. That's something that seems completely doable. And just for the record, other grade separations have been constructed with single track shoe flies. It's completely feasible to run the train schedule through a narrow, short one single track section during the construction period. The other comment I wanted to make was in support of the quiet zone. Just wanted to note, just for information, that Brightline in Florida is a private train operator that's building from Miami up to currently up to Orlando, and they're currently running up to West Palm Beach. They have quiet zones at, I think, most, if not all, the crossings, at least in West Palm Beach. Saw them myself. They didn't even have quad gates. They just had signs warning that the train does not blow the horn. And just recently in the news, you can Google it, there's word that they are now doing testing at 110 miles an hour through the grade crossings that they will be operating through on the new segment from West Palm Beach up to Miami. And that is currently in the news. If you put that in Google News, you'll see lots of articles about it. But that's just to point out that that's the same speed that the High Speed Rail Authority is proposing to run on the peninsula. So that is completely doable with grade crossings. And that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for your comments. The last speaker is Cherie Roth. And you can unmute and make your comments.
Hi, I also live at 101 Alma Street, and I wanted to ditto the comments on the quiet zone. I'm very grateful that the quiet zone is being considered because the train horn often wakes me up at night. So thank you. And that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And Chair, that's the last public comment.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll move into action items. The first one is a verbal update on interagency activities. We'll start with Caltrain.
We don't believe Caltrain or VTA staff will be here.
Okay, but does staff have anything that they learned that we might want to?
Yeah, we can
Put
provide
forward.
as part of the city updates.
Okay,
City staff updates.
so then let's move to the city updates.
So first of all, we like to share about Ripan Bhatia, Senior Engineer with the Office of Transportation. Good afternoon, Chair and the members. First of all, we like to share about the grant applications that we have made in the last few months. Earlier this year, the Office of Transportation submitted a grant application for the grade separation project as part of the multimodal project discretionary grant, or MPDG, for both infra and mega program. Infra is a significant multimodal fleet and highways project grant program. And unfortunately for infra, we received the news that our project did not get funded or selected for grant funding. Only one project in California was selected, and that was in Southern California. And they said that they received more than $26 billion in requests, and that was 11 times more than what they had the funding for. So, but we are not, we are continuing to persist and applying for more grants. And we are still waiting to hear about the mega grant. Also, we have recently submitted another grant application for rail crossing elimination program, and that's for $6 million for the planning funds, and that is for all Churchill, Meadow, and Charleston Road. This is to perform preliminary engineering and environmental documentation if the project gets funded in that program in the next 2 years. We are awaiting that. We are hoping to hear from them later this year or early next year from the federal agencies about the evaluation and the review of the grant. Also, another new grant application is coming up that's opening later this year from the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, and we are keeping an eye on that one as well because they have some significant amount of money for grade separation in that funding. So we are looking into that as their upcoming grant opportunity and preparing to apply for that funding as well. With regards to San Francisco Creek Bridge project, staff did follow up with the Caltrain to reiterate our position that city do like to have Caltrain explore and strongly look into the into rehab and the strengthening of the bridge, and also look into the benefit cost analysis to make sure that that is seriously considered and proceeded forward to be evaluated and considered for as a preferred alternative possibly. We also have discussions with Caltrain on their corridor grade separation study that is somewhat in the beginning stages, that they have hired a consultant and they are developing the scope for the development of the corridor-wide study as well as the stakeholder engagement plan. And they are looking into developing this programmatic approach for organization, project development, funding, and implementation of the grade separation. So we will keep involved, and I understand that they are bringing this information to the LPMG from time to time as well. So we are, as a staff, is keeping engaged with them, and from the local policy group as well. We are hoping that that will strengthen the desire from the Palo Alto to make sure that they do the study these our concerns. Finally, on the quiet zone study, staff has been working with Menlo Park and the consultant that they have hired to evaluate the quiet zone and conduct analysis for Palo Alto Avenue. The consultant is in the data collection process and have performed preliminary analysis. And the next step is to have a joint diagnostic meeting with the CPUC and JPB, which we are planning and hoping to have it in November. So that are the next steps, and those are some of the steps that are required by the federal rail administration, and we are aligned with those. And that concludes my staff report.
Thank you so much, Ripon. That's a lot of great programs going. I wanted to ask about. Is this me?
Apologies, Vice Mayor Koo, it's Philip Hammy. I just wanted to mention that I am here and listening, and I am in transit, so but I will be back at my computer in a few moments.
No problem. Thank you for letting us know. I was thinking somehow my microphone is making these radio noise, but I wanted to also ask Ripon about the VTA ad hoc committee that they're forming. Can you just give us a little bit of more information about that?
Yes, VTA has recently formed a new ad hoc committee for grade separation evaluation as part of the Measure B funding allocations. And their first meeting is starting later this week. Actually, Friday is the first meeting, and they have members from 3 agencies, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and Palo Alto, and Mayor Burt is representing Palo Alto in that committee. At the first meeting is on Friday at 10 o'clock and is available virtually as well.
Very good. I'm glad that we got that update. I was just wondering if my colleagues have anything that they'd like to add or ask questions of. Mayor Burt?
Yeah, thanks. So first, just following up on the context for this ad hoc committee meeting, San Jose Vice Mayor Chappie Jones, who's the chair of the VTA, had heard from a number of the 3 different cities of Sunnyvale, Mountain View, and Palo Alto that there was a real interest in looking at collaboration, understanding the respective roles of VTA and Caltrain going forward on the grade separations. And so Chair Jones decided the best approach to that would be to create an ad hoc committee so that on an ongoing basis, we're really starting to have the dialogue and sharing of information in those ways. So that sounds like a good idea. It's just getting kicked off, and we'll be seeing what's presented and what common interests we start seeing that we should be collaborating on. The other thing, did we receive an update from VTA on funding for out of Measure B funds for our grade separation next studies on Churchill, I think?
Thank you, Mayor Burt. Yes, we did hear from VTA that for additional studies that we are currently performing as part of the refinement of the plans, that the VTA will be allocating funds for those additional studies.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember what the dollar amounts were and which purposes. They were principally for Churchill, as I recall. But do we have that available on?
Yes, my understanding, what I remember is that it's a $710,000 in funding from the from VTA. A total of 800 and something is to be spent, including 10% match from the cities that is required for Measure B. And this is for the three major activities, which is refinement of the conceptual plans for Churchill Avenue, and underpass alternatives at both Meadow and Charleston as well. So that's all included. Included in addition, there is geotechnical preliminary geotechnical studies that we have we are considering right now, as well as the cost estimate revisions that we are pursuing for trench alternative that we would like. We are reviewing as part of this scope. In addition, there is some contingency funds that are available in that for other activities.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cormack, do you have any questions or comments?
I was just thinking that it might be helpful. There was one thing I feel like we haven't gotten an update on in a while. Sorry, I was listening to Ripon. If I come up with it, I'll let you know. Thanks.
Okay, in that case, we'll go to oral communications, please.
Okay, we have a few speakers. So Nadia Nayak, you can go ahead and make your comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to see if we have an update on the Measure A 2000 money. So I had done that research that there was Measure A 2000 money available for the update of the Palo Alto Intermodal Transit Center. And we'd expended about, I don't know, $200,000 of it, I think. And there's like 49 point something million left. And hopefully we can come around with our hat again and see if we can get some money from there. So if you could give an update on that, I'd appreciate it.
Good afternoon again. Yes, we are exploring that the allocation that was previously from Measure A funds for our PAITC project. So we are exploring it, but haven't found any progress yet. Made any progress on that?
I'm sorry, and apologies to cut in here, but and noting that I'm in transit, but we do have a response from VTA. Which recently shared with the mayor, and be happy to share it with you at another time.
You don't want to just share it now? I'm sorry, Mr. Kami. I'm just wondering if maybe we should all know.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Like, I definitely would like to provide an update on it. I mean, it's a little bit complicated, and unfortunately I'm driving right now, so I'm trying to concentrate on that so I can get home. But just, you know, in brief, the VTA board had already prioritized projects for the funding of that, for the use of that funding, and our project was not selected as one of the prioritized projects. So that's just the brief summary of it.
Thank you, Mr. Kami. Yeah, I would say that we would want to kind of explore that again, because if I understand it, this Measure A 2000 money is it not allocated to designated for Palo Alto or for the multimodal, or how does that work? Mayor Burt?
I can share my understanding, but we're still trying to get a fuller understanding of this, which is that it's still within the Measure A guidelines, but that supposedly the dollars have all been assigned to other projects as of now. So
we're going to have to wait for it to build up again.
Well, I don't know whether there will be those funds. Yeah. So that's what we're going to need to understand more thoroughly.
Okay. Apologies. We're still at public comments. I'm very sorry.
Okay, and our next speaker is Shri. Yes, I guess Arnout put his hand down. So Shri, you can go ahead and unmute and speak for up to 3 minutes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shri Sandilya. I'm a junior at Gun High School, and I'm the president of the Gun Bike Club. And past couple weeks, I've been working with Mr. Arnout, to put out a survey regarding the grade separation. And we had a lot of good feedback we had 167 responses from our community. and I just thought it'd be important to share them with you guys. So we noticed that like 78% of our respondents bike to school. So obviously it's a very relevant issue. And the detour at Matadero Creek, in light of the grade separation, would cause 69% of students and 91% of the parents responding to take more time. And I'm included in that. I live right next to JLS, and it would take a significantly longer time for us to get to school. So we also realized that trench is the preferred option, almost overbearingly by the parents, with 61% of them agreeing with that and 44% of students agreeing with this. And by the way, this presentation is shared with Mr. Arnott shared this with you guys, all the data that we collected. And I think what's important to take away from this is that it would cause like a big detour, obviously. And I think more people would be prompted to drive to school, me included, when this construction is taking place. So I'm not sure how feasible it would be to implement this, but I think sticking to just either Meadow and Alma, and like only one of Meadow and Alma and Meadow and Charleston, Alma and Charleston, would be beneficial to keep kids from having to take such a large detour in their time to school. Because another figure that we noted was that it would take, I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, but it would take them a lot more time to get to school with that. I think I did already mention that. I'm just here to ask you guys to consider prioritizing the road safety of the students walking and riding to school over the cars, just because so many kids that I know, myself included, bike to school. And that's like a pretty challenging intersection. It takes a long time as it is, and I definitely agree that it should be fixed. But I think there's some issues with the current plans, because it would take a lot of time. So it'd be awesome if you guys could take a look at the presentation that Arnott and I created, and I would really, really appreciate it if we could make some progress there, because it'd be super cool to implement something new in that area. Thank you so much for your time.
Shri, if you're still there, this is Pat Bird. I just had a follow-up. I thank you very much for this student survey. It was really informative. A question I have: when you were referring to the Matadero Creek crossing, I'm guessing that you're referring to us talking about a dedicated bike crossing in the vicinity of Loma Verde. If that's the case, were you under the understanding that what we've been discussing is pursuing that ahead of construction of the East Meadow and Charleston, so that there would be that crossing available during the construction period, and then that East Meadow and Charleston would continue after construction to have their own bike and ped crossings? Or were you thinking that we were talking about eliminating bike and ped crossings at, say, East Meadow and replacing it with Loma Verde?
No, I was, I appreciate your question. I, as my understanding was that during the construction, which Arnott mentioned would take quite a while due to the complexities with the train and everything, that kids would have the opportunity to take the detour and cross near Loma Verde, and then it would obviously go back to the probably whatever design we choose to be implemented at Meadow and Charleston. I just wanted to point out that that detour is a sizable detour for most students, and I'm not sure like what the best way to be to fix that problem is. And I think personally, just my idea, I don't know how feasible this would be, but my idea would be to only implement the whatever design at either Meadow and Alma or Charleston and Alma. And as I'm speaking, I'm realizing that it might be tricky, since if you're gonna be doing construction with the train tracks, it's probably best to just implement it in both areas. But I definitely think it's important to consider the detours that students would have to take, because I know a lot of kids who would just resort to driving to school instead in an attempt to get to school faster and in a less roundabout way through Matadero Creek.
Thank you.
Okay, we're finished with this topic unless there's more comments. Councilmember Carmack? No, okay, very good. So we'll move to the next, which is our study session to review comments received from various stakeholders to refine conceptual plans for the partial underpass alternative at Churchill Avenue and underpass alternatives at Meadow Drive and Charleston Road. Staff?
Thank you very much. I just got to my computer in time that I can I can do this. I'm Philip Cami, the Chief Transportation Official, and thanks very much for the staff updates, Ripon. Today's study session is following on the City Council direction. Oh, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. This study session is following on the City Council direction for staff to both refine the underpass alternatives and to engage with key stakeholders, which you see on this slide. This item will review the feedback that we've heard from these stakeholders in order to refine the underpass alternatives conceptual plans. And in reviewing the existing right-of-way constraints and in consideration of the City Council adopted criteria regarding right-of-way impacts, we've developed some initial recommendations for the refinement of the conceptual underpass alternatives. And while these are initial recommendations for refinements that we've heard from stakeholders, we are open to rail committee direction, which we could bring to a future meeting as an action item. And so, as I mentioned, this is the list of stakeholders that we were either identified by council and staff for additional engagement. And the next slide, if I could, I'm not sure if there's a delay on my end. The next slide is a brief overview of the comments that were received and the category of comment. And the next slide shows some additional details about the types of feedback, the categories that they fit within. And then the next slide I wanted to also note that we had received additional information from the PTSA, the PIUSD subcommittee, and also there was a Gunn High School survey. So finally with that, I want to let you know that we're going to go through slides that have each of the additional refinement recommendations, and we'll pause with each slide for a discussion if Rail Committee is interested in discussing each of the items. And then this next slide, I'm going to turn over to our consultants at AECOM, Millette Letzinger and Peter DeStefano, who will discuss each of the proposed refinements and recommendations.
Great, thank you, Philip. My name is Peter DeStefano. I'm a civil engineer with AECOM. So let's dive into some of the comments from the stakeholders. Some have expressed a concern about the high volume of bicyclists that'll be entering the facilities and using facilities during the peak times shortly before and after school. Now, except for the tunnel at Kellogg, which is 20 feet, and the two-way pathway for the Meadow and Charleston alternatives, which is also 20 feet, the width of the ped bike ramps for all these alternatives was set at 10 feet. We're recommending an increase of this to 12 feet based on the comments received. This will potentially result in additional impacts to utilities and right-of-way and slightly increase the overall cost. Could you hit? There's a little bit of an animation here.
Yeah. You can take over the control.
Or can I say again? Thank you. All right, just a second here. It says rejoining. There we go. Share screen. There we go. Okay. All right, sorry about that. Thanks for your patience on that. So at this is a cross section here showing at, how do I minimize that? There we go. Okay, this is a cross section shown at Kellogg. And so with the proposed increase from 10 to 12 feet, it'll reduce the lane widths by a foot on each side of the street from 11.5 to 10.5. And an additional increase of the ramp width would result in the potential loss of the landscape strip and the planting on each side of the street. So we're seeking the rail committee's direction on A, the width of the ramps. Is 12 feet sufficient, or should the width be increased beyond that? And B, whether conducting a traffic study to determine a level of service for bicyclists and pedestrians is desirable. Again, that relates back to the comments about the concern about high volume of traffic shortly before and after school.
So we can pause after each slide to seek your feedback, maybe.
Okay, okay, if you want to do it that way, but I also want to be cognizant of public comments. So
Public doesn't need to speak on everything, but they could.
yeah, they might have input. Okay, well, we
It's
can
up to you.
we can just go ahead and have an exchange.
If you like us to go forward on the entire, it's maybe.
I think segments.
Segments,
questions
okay, yeah.
could be.
That-
And then we
that'd
can
be
have
fine.
comments in that
Okay.
rather than.
So do you want to go first, Mayor Burt?
Sure, thanks. So 10.5 feet for the vehicle lane. Is there parking or no parking on the streets in that model?
Yeah, there would be loss of parking on the street. It would just, there's only 10.5 available for the traveled way.
Okay, and the 10.5 foot lane in a residential street without high volume, is that pretty comfortable?
Yeah, we probably 10 feet is probably as narrow as you want to go. So 10.5, we'd be okay with that.
Okay, and then the Kellogg location, what are the current assumptions on, well, I guess I'll go into maybe this links with this traffic study question, which is really where is the bike flow coming from that might use this location versus Seal or something in the vicinity of Seal? And have we done any analysis of that yet, or have you engaged with our Safe Routes to School program to see what if they have any such data?
Maybe I should take it, actually.
Okay.
If I can, so I think that the discussion about Kellogg between Kellogg and Seal is, I think we actually have another slide on that, but that's something that's to be evaluated in the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. And it is something, and you know that the Safe Routes to School team is in my department. They definitely will be very involved. In fact, the manager that's managing the bike and ped transportation plan also manages the Safe Route team. So they're going to be very involved in the input to the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. And of course, we all work together on developing our Safe Routes network.
So this great survey that we had from gun students, it seems that I'm not aware of having a survey of Pauli bike riders and origins. And that's what would really give us the indication of who's riding from where. And at the same time, we'd have a question of, we have the Embarcadero Underpass. What's the present volume of riders from, say, north of Churchill, who take that route? And then also, would that change if we do any of those improvements that are being considered there? So I just want to put that on the table as maybe that's a way that we can gather meaningful data, is something similar to what the gun students have already done here. And then try to then attempt to model that bicycle flow and pattern there. Because I'm trying to envision which student bike riders would elect to take Kellogg rather than Cal Ave or a Seal or Embarcadero. And there's not many high school students who live in between Churchill and Embarcadero there. So I'm open-minded on this, but I'm struggling to understand who's that pool of riders who would use this particular location over another location, not instead of no crossing.
Yeah, and if I can, I think a couple different things. Number one, I think that our Safe Routes team in an occasion has gotten dot maps that show where students are coming from. And so that would be really helpful in looking at, and that's something that we would certainly consider in this context. Also, I think right now, as long as things don't change, the Pali catchment area extends to Colorado. So that might point to Seal making more sense for Pali High School students.
Well, if we have those dot maps already, I'm wondering whether we might have enough information to move ourselves away from bothering to put expenses and resources and time at looking at Kellogg, if we have enough information to conclude that that's not the preferred location.
Yeah, I think we'd have to find out from PAUSD if we can get those dot maps. We don't have them currently, but we have gotten them in the past.
Well, I'd encourage us to do it. We've had this Kellogg on the table for a couple of years now, and my gut is that we're going to conclude it's not a right alternative, but here we are spending money and time on evaluating it. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Koo. So am I right? We're supposed to be focused on the width on this one, and we have the other slides for the other topics.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So what is the current width of the Homer tunnel?
It's a little bit shy of 20 feet.
Okay.
And the one at Kellogg is proposed to be 20 feet.
Sorry.
The tunnel. So then once you get beyond the limits of the Caltrain right away, then we narrow it down to fit within the limits of the street.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Actually, could we see that other slide? So are we just talking about the pink part, not the brown part?
Yeah.
If we could move to that one, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, sure. Yes,
Okay.
Exactly. We're talking about the pink part.
We're actually talking about the okay. All right, interesting. And what about California Avenue? What are the widths as they approach that tunnel?
I believe that one is 8 feet wide. It's very narrow.
Yeah. Okay, great. If you could go back to the prior slide. Thank you. That was very helpful to get oriented. So in this one, we can still retain the trees, right? Even at 12?
Correct.
Okay. What are the downsides of moving to 12 from 10?
There's really not a lot of downside. It's a slightly more narrow lane. Some of the driveways may have to get modified or widened so vehicles can back out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a detail we'll have to look at into. There may be additional impacts to utilities potentially because it's more.
It's wider.
We're excavating. Yeah, we're excavating more in the street.
Okay.
Other than that, I mean, it'd be slightly higher cost too. Be greater excavation.
At 12 feet instead of 10.
Right.
Okay. And the reason we had it at 10 before is that sort of struck a balance between vehicles and bicycles.
Yeah, we chose 10 originally. We thought that was, just again, the balance between making it, too narrow and too wide. But we're open to make it a little bit wider because we've been getting a lot of feedback that 10 is just not quite wide enough.
Okay. I'm comfortable with this modification to the plan. Thank you.
If I can, I think it'd be helpful just to consider that, and I noted that we have another discussion, a slide to discuss the Seal versus Kellogg, but I feel like this is kind of intricately tied and maybe we should change the order. But just to note that this discussion about the width would be applicable to both either Seal or Kellogg. This is not limited to the discussion of Kellogg because they're similar dimensions. So potentially widening a bike path under this recommendation could be at Kellogg and or at Seal.
That's right. The dimensions of the street are the same at Seal. So this configuration would be similar at Seal.
As you're looking at this, at these width of the lanes, are you taking in consideration also for trucks? Because nowadays I see that they're actually not as certain how much space they have, so they tend to move into the other lane in these neighborhood streets, especially when there's cars parked on. I know Kellogg, one side doesn't have parking, right? Or do they both? Yeah, they do have both parking. Yeah. So I just want to kind of make sure that is also considered. Because there's
absolutely
depth perception or something, so they're not.
Right.
I see uncertainty there.
Yeah, and you can see on the cross section, there's a barrier on one side and then the curb on the other. So a vehicle will tend to try to shy away from both. So we want to keep this from being too narrow and being comfortable for people to drive it, and especially for trucks as well.
So I'll add that this definitely going to be on a narrower side,
Right.
and having no parking on both sides definitely helps. But the trucks 10-foot lane is typical construction lane and some available in residential neighborhoods.
One more question. So the intention is for no parking on the street.
Correct.
I see. For both Kellogg and / or Seal.
Right, for the limits of the pink ramp that's shown on the plan, that's shown on this next slide.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
The questions caused me to appreciate there's another issue with this having a barrier on either side. And that's related to the proliferation of delivery vehicles, Amazon, UPS, even US Postal Service. And they typically park in the street. In this case, they would by necessity park in the street. In normal circumstances, a vehicle would be able to go around if there's not blocked on the other side. And in this case, it's going to completely block the street for that section of, it looks like it's only a half dozen homes or so.
Yeah, a couple hundred feet maybe.
Yeah, but it is something to bear in mind. I'm not glad that we have that problem, but I want to make sure that we're thinking about that because it's been growing. Frankly, I see these vehicles stop in the middle of Alma, in the middle of traffic. It's a big problem that we in other cities haven't really adjusted our rules according to this proliferation that has been growing and will continue to grow. So it's something to consider here. I just want to make sure we're thinking about that one too.
It's a really valid point because this area would need to be a no stopping area along the length of this because that would be a problem. It would cause an entire stoppage.
Although I would assume that Alma today is a no stopping area and it doesn't seem to have much effect. Maybe I don't know if we need to sign it more, but it creates dangerous hazards. And I've noticed them right at this location on Alma as well, frequently stopping there for apartment buildings. So different topic, but I wanted to put that out there.
If I can add one piece of context. So I live in this neighborhood, so I actually know the street patterns fairly well. And one thing about Seal that is not the same about Kellogg is that at the corner of Seal and Alma, you have properties that are not R1 properties. They're RM30 or RM something else. So if there was a property impact, and there had to be some sort of acquisition or some impact there, you could reconfigure those differently. And I will say, living just off of Seal tends to have a lot more parked cars on the street there because of those RM30 properties. And so when we're looking at what those challenges might be and if there's other impacts and how we might think about those, it's something to note that's different than Kellogg there.
Thank you.
One more question.
Yeah, sure.
So what is your outreach to the community on the two streets about the parking? Obviously, that's going to have to be pretty robust.
Chair Koo, the outreach for merits of Kellogg versus Seal would be considered as part of the bike and ped transportation plan update. And as part of that, the outreach element will be included.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments or questions? In that case, we can move to the next section.
Very good. So this is showing a plan view at Kellogg. The ped bike ramps that we have shown previously in the past couple of years on these exhibits were based on 8% grades of the ramp with 5-foot landings every 35 feet. Some of the stakeholders, some of the comments we received believe this is too steep and they would prefer a flatter slope. So you can see here on the slide here, we show a 5%, comparing it to the 8% with landings. And with the 5% grade, it would increase, the grade would, of course, is flatter, but it increased the length of this, in this case, by 80 feet. It would depend on how much of the elevation difference is, but in this case, it's about 80 feet. So we're seeking the committee's direction on this item. Should the slopes be revised to 5%?
And the current
Yeah.
slope is what?
Yeah, so the pink, the limits of the pink are based on an 8% grade with 5-foot landings, similar to what you would see for the ramps at a ballpark. You know, they're ADA compliant, but some feel that that's a little bit too steep for bicyclists. So they've asked us to revise that to 5%. So the drawback to the 5% is that, you know, it's similar to the increasing the width. You have more excavation, you're increasing the limits, increasing the footprint of the project. May impact some right-of-way utilities, et cetera. So similar issues as before.
Yeah, go ahead.
For point of reference, do you happen to know what the CalAV grade is?
Yeah, that's, I want to say it's 12%. It's really steep.
Yeah, it is. So good. So 8% is considerably better than that, not
Yes.
ideal.
Right.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cormack.
Yeah, that was my question as well. So I guess there's a difference between ideal and preferable, but the 8% with 5-foot landing meets ADA requirements. So we're not just talking about bikes, right? We're talking about people pushing their own wheelchairs or having someone else push their wheelchair, walkers, et cetera.
That's correct.
Okay. So other places right now, what is the best practice? Is the best practice 5 or is this, okay, let me separate between best practice and sort of standard. What are we seeing other places in California, which is bicycle friendly?
I would say in general, where the constraints are really tight, you know, 8% is fine. Whereas, you know, if you have the room, you have the space, then, you know, 5% is preferable. So sometimes it's a case by case basis, depending on the location.
Okay. And at Kellogg, it's a little hard for me to see. Is that half of the first block in the pink? Is it all of the first block in the pink? Like, is that crosswalk at a street?
All of it. I think it's halfway. Oh.
Sorry, if that was Ripon, I couldn't hear you very well.
Yeah, there's a crosswalk in the picture. I'm pretty sure it goes to the end of the block. Peter, can we confirm? Also noting that Castilleja is on that corner. So if you expand past that intersection, you're now in front of Castilleja. And I'm assuming if you have to go further than the intersection, you have to build a wall and not let cars go through. That would also change the traffic patterns.
If you go back to the graphic,
Sure.
I think it shows the crosswalk or right.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm not sure where that
but
is.
that's a proposed crosswalk as part of the improvements. So the Emerson Street is further down the block, so it's maybe half the block.
Oh, I think, thank you,
So,
Ribbon.
okay,
I thought that was an existing, yeah, that makes sense. It's a proposed
Okay.
crosswalk. Yeah.
so it's half the, sorry, if you can go back to the Google map one, actually, that was super helpful.
Correct.
The
That's about,
pink right now at 8% is half of, is that the whole block? Need you to, oh, there we go, I see.
When you say the whole block, you mean to Emerson? No.
Yeah.
No, definitely not. I want to say it's less than half.
Looks like there are 10 houses between Alma and Emerson on Kellogg,
Okay, and how many are shown on the pink one?
about 5.
Okay, so we're already at half the block at 8%.
Yeah, maybe I think better this image.
Okay.
Better? No, not really.
Well, yeah, it does show the houses though. I think that's really what's helpful is to see the
Yeah,
houses.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. About 5 houses,
about 5
yeah.
houses.
Okay, so halfway through. Okay, great. This is a tough one for me. This is, this is the difference between what is doable and what might be ideal for one mode of travel. So this one is hard for me. I think it seems just at an order of magnitude, it would be much more expensive to do this than to do the 12-foot that we just agreed to on the prior slide. And I see Mr. Kami nodding. So unless there's something I'm missing about some particular use case, I think 5% seems like it would be ideal, but since we don't have ideal situation, I think for the time being, I'm comfortable with the 8 and the landings, which I think everyone will appreciate.
Can I just add one thing? I don't think we're trying to make a final decision on what's going to be constructed. I mean, we're just trying to make a decision on what to move forward with in the planning phase here. So I don't want anyone to feel like, the decisions made here today are going to last a lifetime. I mean, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rippin. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
It's for the refinement of the conceptual alternatives. So the question is, should we refine the conceptual alternatives to have a 5% grade and see what that looks like, which has impacts, as you mentioned, or should we leave it at the existing 8% grade as was originally designed in the concept?
Go ahead.
Well, as someone who typically is inclined to advocating for the best bike circumstances, I'm not sure that in this location, in this alternative, that the 5% is a necessity. When I give it that point of reference to the Cal Ave underpass, if I'm visualizing the difference between a 12 and an 8, and an 8 is reasonable. I ride the 12% routinely. That is steep these days, but 8 I think is not exceptionally steep. But I did want to ask about that issue of refining these alternatives, and it goes back to my previous question of how much work are we looking at and expense are we looking at spending on refining a Kellogg alternative rather than trying to, at this point in time, determine whether Kellogg is a viable location, and then decide whether to spend the next funds.
Yeah, this kind of refinement is relatively routine. Doesn't take a lot of effort. Again, we're only talking about this specific location for Kellogg, so not a lot of time and effort would be spent on it.
If I can, I think it also is another one that this same refinement would be relevant to Seal if Seal were the location selected. So, I mean, the 8% grade at Kellogg and Seal is the same thing and kind of has similar impacts to the, just adjusting the length by the additional, I think 85 feet or 35 feet or whatever.
Thank you. Okay.
And also, one of my other question is that like it is going to be on all three alternatives that we're looking at, not just at Kellogg Avenue. So there are like ramps and ramps at other locations at Meadow and Charleston, and they are also being considered at 8% with this 5 feet landing every 35 feet. In those scenarios, also we would have the same kind of assumptions at this time that for those conditions we'll continue to use 8% with 5% landing at this time. Correct?
Yeah. If I could just add to that, Ripon, let's can we take a quick look at those? I have it up here. I pull it up. So this is the one at Charleston. This is the PED. This is the main PED bike ramp. We do show it at 4% on this side and 5% on that. Are there other ramps you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Because this is a pathway, right?
Okay.
I'm talking about ramps.
Oh, you're right. I know what you're talking about now. Thank you for clarifying. There's a ramp over here. Let me zoom in. I forgot about this one. There's a switchback ramp here that's based on 8%.
Correct. And in this particular case, changing to 5% would have property impacts of the, so keeping at 8% at 5% with that same landing would, minimize those kind of impacts.
Yeah, we're probably looking at some kind of different configuration of this ramp because, this to avoid the impact to this property over here. Thanks, Ripon, for mentioning that.
Can you go to Nadia?
Okay.
Thank you. So I wanted to thank Ripon for his comment because I think it does, it's hard to apply a formula to one side and not think about the impacts project-wide across all the projects. The 5% is a lot. I remember Penny Ellison saying 5% for little kids, right? So it's not the average bike rider. It's not, a full grown man. It is little kids having to get themselves over the area. And obviously, depending on the location of this, if you talk about the Seal one, for Old Palo Alto, it actually allows access to Pierce Park, which would be a huge benefit for Old Palo Alto, but means a lot more families, a lot more strollers, a lot more little kids that maybe would not be what the Kellogg path would be used for in the way that we're thinking about it now. Second is I would just say overall, first of all, this is a great example of how a small percent change in grade makes a big difference in the length of something, right? So remember that later. But I think you're going to have to, as a council, pull back at some moment and kind of think about, is the idea to make it as economical as possible, or is the idea to think about the end users? Because you're going to have these constant trade-offs. And while it seems like you're arguing about 5%, 8%, not such a big deal, but it has property impacts. It has all sorts of other philosophical and, macro kind of policy issues are kind of interwoven in this. So I appreciate Peter DeStefano saying, we don't necessarily need to decide all these things today. It's just to make you aware that these refinements will have additional impacts. And while it looks like, okay, this makes it 80 feet longer on a cost basis, I don't really understand what that means. I mean, if it's 80 feet longer, it seems like a really big number. But then if they tell you, well, it's $200 more to do that, not that that's a real number, but you have a trade-off there. And so I just want to warn against that, because some of these, what seem like simple choices, have other implications. But XCAP's general recommendation was 5% is better. That's exactly why the Meadow Charleston ramps are 5%, the bike ped dedicated underpasses.
And I really appreciate, Nadia, your statements, because that was also something that I was going to mention. There's a long-term factor. This is something that we're going to build in our community that is going to look into safety, but also we have to be aware that these routes are used by both adults as well as children, and there are many children that are going to be learning how to ride, and we want to make sure that those are easy for them to access as well as for it to be safe. Okay, if we're done with this, next section.
So do we have a direction to see if it's continuing with 8% with at 8% slope with the 5 feet landing every 35 feet? Is that?
Any comments from colleagues? It might be too early to kind of look at right now.
Feedback.
Yeah. Thank you, Ripon.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add I'll put on my safe routes hat really quickly that it's not just the wheelchairs and the kids, it's also the adults that are with the bike trailer that are carrying the kids that should be a consideration, because that's difficult sometimes as well. I don't know that we need real specific direction on this one, other than to note that this was a requested refinement. And if we want to do this kind of refinement now under our conceptual design, then we can. If not, it could be something that's continues to be considered as we go through the process.
So I would support that we stay for the time being with the 8%, not ruling out the 5%. And if Kellogg does emerge as a preferred alternative location, then we probably want to look at both options.
Chair Koo, can I?
Oh, yes, please.
Sure, thanks. 2 follow-ups, specifically one on Kellogg is, what implications would that have for the ramp at the other side? We've only talked about the Kellogg side. Is there room even on the other side to do 5%?
On the south side ramp, we'd have to take a closer look at that. It's getting a little bit tight, but on the north side, I don't think there's constraints. So I believe it could be done on the other side of the tracks as well.
Okay, I think of them as east and west of Alma, but I'll try to translate that. I'm thinking of the side on the Pally side, on the high school side. Is there room?
When I said north south, I meant north south of the tunnel. So
okay.
It's confusing.
She's talking about the other side of the tracks.
On the other side of the track,
which is the 30-yard line on the football field.
Yeah, we pull that up. You're talking about over here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the Pally's west. Makes sense.
Right. This is west of the track. So yeah, I was talking about this ramp on so north of the tunnel, to the left of the tunnel. There's really no constraint here. You're starting to get into the constraint over here with Churchill.
Okay, so it's not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we think there's enough room there, but we'd have to verify it.
Okay, that's helpful. And then I see that Nadia helpfully sent us some super easy to understand visuals of Rangstorff that Mountain View is doing. What is the % grade they're using? It looks like they're doing what I would call the University Ave approach, where the bike and ped lane is not as fully depressed as the road. Does anyone know what the grade is in Mountain View for bikes in that hybrid?
For the road or for the pedestrian?
For the pedestrian path.
I don't have that information. Do you know that, Noah? No.
No.
We don't have that information.
Just something to think about. I'm in alignment with Pat on this. I don't think we should, drop it from the list as a nice to have. But I don't know that there are very many really young kids using this as a safe route to school at this point. It's not near an elementary school. We'd have to think through some of it. But I'm comfortable with Pat's restatement of what I said earlier.
Yeah, thanks. And can we have that prior slide back, because that prompted me as Allison was talking about that, what we call the west side of the tracks.
The exhibit?
Sure. And what you showed there, this pink line that's perpendicular to the underpass, that's where we have the current bike path behind Pally. And where are you envisioning that even a 12-foot ramp would fit between? We have the fence to the Caltrain tracks, and then really only about a foot or two on either side before we hit the Pally fence.
Yeah.
So where are you envisioning this would fit in addition to the The existing bike path?
Yeah, so the retaining wall will be right along the edge of the existing path. In fact, the next slide,
So would this intrude on the Caltrain corridor?
it's already, yeah, the existing path is already inside the Caltrain.
Well, no,
property.
but would this intrude additionally in the corridor beyond the existing path?
Yes.
Okay. That's a big deal to Caltrain. They gave us that access
Yeah.
back 25 years ago, almost. And they weren't envisioning what they have today. Now, they still have 4 tracks on the table. There's no way that they're going to give it to us as long as they have the 4 tracks. We don't think that's feasible. But even then, I think we need to put on the table that Kellogg necessitating access to the Caltrain right away for this is not a small deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is not, and it's a good
Yeah.
point.
And when we get to seal, I need to look at your design, but my assumption is we were going to look at continuing in the same direction because we have park space there.
Okay, right. This is a good segue into the next slide, because there was a comment from a stakeholder about reconfiguring the ramps here on the west side of the tracks at Kellogg. Let me pull that one up. I believe this was a comment from someone at Payback.
Correct.
Ribbon, do you know who that
Yes.
was? Okay, I
It
don't
was
know the
Art
name.
Lieberman, I believe.
Art Lieberman? Yeah, so the area of concern is over here for where the entrance or where the tunnel daylights to existing ground here. So let's go ahead and zoom in. Take a look at this area. So this is the current layout. This is the ramp coming down towards the tunnel on the left for the tunnel underneath the tracks to Kellogg. And in this configuration, so bicyclists coming up the ramp will exit out and then want to slide over and get onto the right side as they head south or to the right. And then bicyclists traveling in the opposite direction, if they want to stay on the path and head towards Embarcadero, there's this potential conflict here. So there was a suggestion by Art to reconfigure this layout as such, to slide the ramp over closer to the high school, closer to the bleachers, and then split the ramp, have a unidirectional on each side at grade. So, yeah, so the north, so each direction doesn't have that conflict.
Peter, this is the west side, right?
Right,
Of Alma, okay.
right. Yeah, let me go back to here. We're specifically talking about this area over here on the west of the tracks between Churchill and Kellogg. So again, this is the current layout. Potential conflict for bicycles traveling in opposite directions. And this revised layout would eliminate that potential conflict or minimize that conflict. So we're seeking direction from the committee about whether this configuration should be considered. Of note here, and this goes back to Mayor Burt's comment that he just made, is how does this impact the school potentially? And it has essentially the same impact within the Caltrain right away, but this will push everything out further west and impact the school's property. So that's really the drawback to there. It's a safer configuration, but it does have its shortcomings in that sense.
Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Koo. Mr. DeStefano, would we do the same thing at the north end of this west tunnel as well?
Correct, yeah. It would be essentially a mirror image.
Okay, I like this idea, and I think it's reasonable, to ask one of our many partners in this, the school district, to help us out with this space for it. I think this makes a ton of sense.
Nadia.
I just wanted to say that for the Southgate neighborhood, which is right there, they attend Walter Hayes and Green Middle School. So actually all of the Southgate neighborhood has to use these ramps for kids of elementary and middle school to cross the tracks to go to the east side, whether it's going to be at Kellogg or at Seal. So talking about the age of riders and how many bicyclists of a certain age, I just wanted to point that out. And so you'll have to think about how little kids do with directional traffic.
Well, that's a good point. Shedding light on our previous discussion on the 8 versus 5%, that is a group of school-age children that do move that direction. I will say that on the Pally Field here, on this end, that land is not really utilized today, where you're talking about kind of flaring it out. Whereas on the other end of the field, it might be more problematic, but those are details to be sorted out. But this is kind of passive landscaping space right now, as I recall.
So how will it affect Palo Alto High School's right of way? This is Mr. Lieberman's, right? Suggestion.
Oops, sorry, was that? Yeah, the yellow line here would be the edge of the path. And I believe it almost would certainly encroach inside the school's property. Maybe I could go back to.
And if I can, I believe that this currently where, yeah, you can see it a bit better here. That currently that area there is where the bleachers are
Right.
on the track. Not that it
Fence.
overlaps them completely, but either it at least would push up against the bleachers, or potentially would require the bleachers be relocated or adjusted.
I concur with that, what Philip just said. The bleachers may have to get redone somehow to accommodate this extra width.
I also did want to point out that the matrix, if you remember the matrix only talks about what would happen in the Kellogg scenario. It doesn't actually mention the Seal scenario, as best I can tell. I'm looking at line number P, which says talks about the construction impacts and explains what would be in the right of way and what isn't. I didn't see Seal
Correct.
anywhere.
Yeah, Seal is
an
new
after.
task,
Mhm.
and that hasn't been accomplished yet. So
Yeah.
we are waiting on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this next slide here talks about the two-way bike path at Meadow and Charleston. So shifting gears here a little bit. So many of the stakeholders have expressed a concern about the two-way bike path on one side of the road. So this here is an animation, just a stick animation of the westbound traveling pedestrians and bicyclists on Meadow. They'd have to cross the street at Emerson and then, oops, sorry about that. They'd cross there at Emerson and then continue underneath Alma, underneath the tracks, until they reach Second Street, where they have to cross again to get onto the other side of the street. To make these maneuvers safer, we're recommending looking into mitigation measures such as flashing beacons or a hawk signal in the subsequent phases of the project. For those not familiar with HAWK, that's an acronym for High Intensity Activated Crosswalk. So that's where like a push button activation or a motion activation could actually trigger a signal. So those are the recommendations that we're making to make these crossings a little bit safer for pedestrians and bicyclists.
And to add to that is we will seek additional input from our community in finding out what the best solution is, and that would be done at later phase of the final design process.
Councilmember Cormac.
Thank you. Is this just with the underpass version, or is this, okay, so that's not clear from the slide. All right, and then what is the little brown thing that's the top of the little three brown things? Is that some kind of bridge? And if of the four, what is it and where does that go?
Just to clarify the first question, just to note, everything we're discussing today is in relation to only the underpass alternatives.
Okay.
So we're just looking to refine the underpass alternatives.
People could easily be confused if they're just, watching. Okay. So
Yeah.
the top of those little brown things.
Yeah, and this is specific to the Meadow and Charleston underpasses where the two-way bike path is on one side of the street. So in one direction of travel, in this case, Meadow traveling west, they have to cross twice. On Charleston, going in the opposite direction, they also have to cross twice. All right, to answer your question about the brown thingy, let's take a look at, I'm going to take a look at the Meadow. I'm going to zoom in here. I think you're asking about this.
Yes. What's that?
Yeah, so that is a bridge over that spans across Meadow. So it allows pedestrians and bicyclists traveling northbound or southbound on Alma to get across Meadow.
Sorry, which way is north in this?
I'm sorry.
Going to the left.
Yeah, north we're considering to the left there like that. I know it's not true north.
Okay, that's fine. So, okay. Why is that little brown thingy bridge, I don't know what to call it, is that bi-directional?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason someone coming westbound on Meadow would not stay on the north side of Meadow and then use that is that it connects to the top level and not the under level.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they could
right.
use that, but then they'd have to circle back in the opposite direction to get over
I
here.
see. Okay, if you could go back to the main one now. And the question here is, I read through all of the entire worksheet, and let me just stop here and thank staff for doing such a thorough job, and to all the members of the public who submitted comments. I thought this was one of the most effective ways. I don't know how many years we've been doing this, a lot, but this was one of the most effective ways to sort of understand the concerns and recommendations, and to see the staff response. It was fantastic. Having read all those and looking at this, your question, which is not here, but is the one that's on the summary, should we study new alternatives that provide ped bike on each side of the street, which is an additional scope to that? I answer yes. So that's where I am on this. I appreciate the effort that's gone in to quote, make it all work. But I read through all of those, and these are really knowledgeable people from all different parts of our community who really suggested that, having it on both sides makes the most sense.
Councilmember Cormac, just wanted to clarify that slide is further down our presentation. It is very similar and similar concerns, but in this particular slide, we are looking at the crossings that are associated with having bike ped pathway on one side of the roadway.
So what input do you want then on this slide? I'm just going based on your summary, which seems pretty aligned with the slides.
Yeah, maybe if I could add to that, Ripon. So what we're saying on this slide is if we kept this configuration as is, we would make propose some safety mitigations for these crosswalks. We have a slide coming up that talks about studying a different alternative that has a traditional design with a ped bike path on each side of the street.
Okay,
So
then I'll say
that's coming up.
Then I'll say thank you for the mitigations in response to what people had to say. And also now I've already stated my point on the next slide.
Thank you.
I think it's like 5 more slides. But yeah.
Any other questions and comments? Mayor Berg?
Just one comment on this. The overpass that's really essentially at grade, does it elevate that brown line or does it stay at grade? Yeah, and
Right.
currently we don't have a high volume of bike travel along that, calling it east side of Alma, but it is a very wide parking strip that lends itself to an off-road bike path in the future. And I don't think that's part of our current bike and ped master plan. Philip, is that one of the things that's being considered in the future bike ped master plan, is expanding that all the way down to kind of San Antonio area?
It could be. So just, I mean, actually, we're very open to everything at this, well, noting that we haven't officially kicked it off, but once we do that, it's going to be a public input process to help us figure out what areas to look at.
Okay, well, one of the exceptional things about this area of the east side of Alma is it is an exceptionally wide buffer between back fences and Alma, whereas north of here has either less buffer or many curb cuts. And so this also has very few curb cuts between this location and San Antonio. So it lends itself to being one of the few locations in the city that we could actually put a off-road path that's of significance going forward. And so I just want to get that out there, and that this design would support that if it should occur.
Do you have any comment, Nadia?
Yeah, just a brief comment. I think it was a previous meeting where the comment was made that, these drawings were always intended mostly to show property impacts, and they're not great for showing the way bikes are moving. And I just want to highlight the fact that even just the questions of like, what is that brown thing is a good example of how these designs aren't great for explaining that. And just as a high level, and trying to put on a bicycle and pedestrian advocacy hat and not my XCAP hat, XCAP was given the freedom to think about how would you design things if anything goes, right? If property impacts goes, if anything goes. And I think that you're going to have to go through that in a bike pedestrian way as well. I mean, I've been asked offline, how come we're willing to have property impacts to figure out the best way for cars to move, but we're not looking at that for bicycle and pedestrian things. And I will just point that the amount of concrete and the amount of convoluted turns that we're sort of looking at in various places begs the question, like, is this really the way to look at things? And so I felt like that's something I wanted to highlight for the committee.
I would like to add to Mayor Burt's previous point about bike and ped for future consideration. As our previous discussion about bike ramp widths, we will also make sure that these widths are increased to 12 feet where feasible. So that should help that continuity of the bike lanes in future if that's going through Alma.
So, I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to what Ribbon just said. These pedestrian bridges were shown as 10 feet wide, so we would make the modification on these exhibits as well to make those 12 feet wide.
And also for reference, all brown things are structures, so they are structural elements just in all the slides that we
I did figure that out. I mean, I called them bridge thingies, but yeah, I got it.
Yeah, and our bad. In the past, we've done a little animation to show a little dotted line so you can kind of understand the pathway, but next time we'll bring that back.
So I just want to say that, I appreciate all the mitigations and the creative ways of getting bike peds into a very narrow road. So I just want to make sure, with the great number of different ages and abilities to use these pathways, obviously we want to make sure that it is straightforward so that there's no confusion in how it's, crossings and so forth. I mean, I see the Emerson crossing, the 2nd Street crossing, potentially, I do see that there might be confusion there, as well as causing traffic to back up over there. I also want to add that, the beacons, the flashing beacons, There's one on Clemo and at Arostadero. It's very difficult to see the flashing. So that's something that needs to be addressed as well if this is going to be a means of ensuring that crossing is going to be taking place.
Yes, we'll make sure that their visibility issues are addressed and make sure that those are taken into consideration when designing those facilities. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Okay. This next slide addresses many comments I received from several different stakeholders. So this is related to the 90-degree turns on the ramps and how this impacts line of sight and maneuverability of bikes. So this layout here, this is the current layout that we have shown for the Kellogg Tunnel, specifically on the west side of the tracks near the high school. This allows for about a 10-foot turning radius for bikes, very similar to the Homer Avenue Tunnel that's shown here in this animation, with the bikes kind of coming down parallel to the tracks and making that 90-degree right turn into the tunnel. So we are recommending a slight modification to the layout to flare out the ends of the tunnel to improve the line of sight. This would also allow for a slight increase of the turning radius to allow for better maneuverability of all types of bicycles, including cargo and tandem bikes. So we did take a look at these civil software program called AutoTurn that has these bicycles in their library, and it shows that, like, for example, what's shown here is a cargo bike being able to make this turn safely.
Well, just real quickly, I appreciate this effort to improve line of sight. As somebody who uses his ring a bell very loudly and regularly at the Homer Tunnel, I know it's a present hazard, and anything that reduces that minor detail, but even mirrors and things like that might be advantageous in one of these hazardous locations. Yeah, thanks. And we kind of jumped past seal. Do we have the?
There's another slide.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Do you need anything from us, Peter?
I'm sorry. So just to note one more thing, because my staff's asking, just to note, it's the same thing. We also looked at not just tandem bikes, because I don't know how often you've seen tandem bikes, but that's meant to to illustrate a long bike. We also looked at bikes with trailers and other bikes as well. So just wanted to note that for the discussion. And to answer your question, I don't think we need anything unless the rail committee disagrees with the recommendation that we have, which is, of course, to flare the ends of the tunnel where we can.
And we are open to suggestions. So thank you, Mayor, for adding that information.
Okay, then if we're good, then we can go on to the next, please.
Very good, thank you. All right, this next slide, getting back to the other side of the tracks at Kellogg, there was a comment from a couple of the stakeholders about essentially creating a dead end at Kellogg at Alma. So they wanted to eliminate access from Alma to Kellogg and vice versa. And the thought here was to reduce the traffic on Kellogg to make it safer for bikes entering and exiting the end of the ramp. Now in this configuration, however, since you'd be creating a dead end, we'd have to make an accommodation for a U-turn movement at the west end of the street over here near Alma for, let's say, an emergency vehicle or a garbage truck. And the radius needed for that movement is pretty substantial, as you can see here on the slide, and require the acquisition of at least one property on each side of the street. So to avoid these right-of-way impacts, it's our recommendation to keep the configuration as is and not introduce a dead end at Kellogg and or Seal.
Finished? Okay.
Sorry.
No, I'm just wondering. I see Councilmember Cormack's hand.
Thank you, Chair Koo. I just want to take a moment to say this kind of visual is so helpful. so many times we've had staff or consultants say that's not going to be possible because of X. And I think sometimes it's just hard for people because they're like, oh, but, I can imagine whatever. But, showing the length of the of the fire truck here really brings it home. And I know it's a lot of effort to do these. And I just want to say I appreciate staff taking all of these, suggestions so seriously and helping us see, what's feasible and what's not.
Anybody else? I think it makes sense what you're suggesting, so, or recommending. If nothing else, then we'll move to the next.
Yeah, and the next slide here, I'm going to pass it over to Ribbon.
So we did also receive several comments to show the connectivity of the nearby facilities, including libraries, including GLS, Cubberley, and Gunn High School, and all different major facilities within the city as part of the grade separation project. Certainly it's going to be beyond the limits of the grade separation project to have that, but we recommend that since that all the network level analysis and network level connectivity is considered as a part of the bike and ped transportation plan, and that updates and other things could be considered as part of the review and update in the bike ped transportation plan update. So we would make sure that the continuity of whatever is proposed as part of the bike and ped transportation plan is maintained throughout the grade separation project. And so if it's a class 1 bike path, that we would make all the attempts to make sure that the class 1 bike path continues through the project. If it is class 2, then we make sure it's class 2. So those are the kind of principles that we are following as part of the grade separation project. But that was our hope and attempt in this grade separation project. There was another connectivity issue that was brought up, which we will be discussing later on the roadways, which is about having connectivity on the crossing bike boulevards to be maintained. So the major bike boulevard that crosses that Meadow and Charleston is Park Boulevard. There was suggestions of how we could realign Park Boulevard to maintain that connectivity, and we will be discussing that in a later slide. But just want to make sure that those two connectivity issues were addressed as part of the network level plan.
Nadia?
So the comprehensive plan actually has in it a concept to do a formal bike ped circulation study related to grade separations. Is that expected to be included as part of this new BPTP program? Because that's literally one of the projects that was in the comp plan that XCAP then included in their recommendations. Was it something that studies not just basically how the bike peds connect into the network through grade separations and through the other bike ped crossings that XCAP recommended should happen to be able to keep that connectivity? So I just wanted to understand when you guys are looking at the BPTP plan, I think there was been discussion about trying to talk about those new crossings that were suggested, but then is that going to be part of sort of a whole overview of the network of showing all the areas of connectivity? So that would fulfill what the comprehensive plan is asking for?
So network level connectivity and network level bike and ped movements and traffic circulation will be part of the bike and ped transportation plan. And the elements from there could be implemented as part of different projects.
Okay. Next.
Oh, sorry, Chair Koo?
I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No worries. It's very small. Just want to point out that person in the middle is not wearing a helmet in this photo. So in the next go round, maybe we could just have our comms people take a look and ensure that there's a helmet like front and center. Thanks. Okay,
You know, I just want to note this was the 2012 bike and ped plan. So
Yeah, I get it. It wasn't on your
we
watch. I get
certainly
it.
would not have a photo like that on our.
I'm sure someone would catch it before it got out.
Oh, and look, people are actually walking on the sidewalks instead of in the middle of the street like we now do.
The next slide, this is about the construction impacts. There were several comments that were associated with how the construction would accommodate bike and pedestrians in different phases, which definitely is an important task. And usually we will be looking at in the future phases as we look into the construction phasing of the project. However, our intent is to make sure that there are provisions made in the construction to accommodate bike and ped crossing, at least at one of the crossing between Meadow and Charleston in South Palo Alto when the construction is occurring during all phases of the project, and that we evaluate all modes of travel during those construction phases. So it's not a forgotten task. It's just that once we have get to a point where we have a path forward, we will be looking at into more detail in each phasing of how that ped and bike will be accommodated for. And as a part of City Council direction to the city staff, we are considering new, we have to study new bike crossings in South Palo Alto as part of the bike ped transportation plan update. And we understand that this committee also have, a great interest in advancing those projects in advance of grade separation projects. So there's definitely different elements that are in play that are looking into this construction impacts. And so we will definitely be mindful and plan as we move along.
Anybody?
Well, thanks for emphasizing that. I think through this whole grade separation process, the community remains largely focused on the outcomes after construction, and we keep mentioning construction impacts. But we had one day a couple months ago where one of our grade crossings was shut down, and it was a horrendous impact during a period when we are still comparatively low on traffic. And I think we need to elevate the community understanding of how severe that is. And that would help inform decisions where we're not merely looking at the post-construction outcomes, but really seriously considering and weighing within the different options which have the least construction impacts. And I think we've underemphasized that throughout the process. It's been there, but I think the public just doesn't fully grasp it. And frankly, I'm not even sure if all the council fully grasps it. So I'd really recommend that we really drive that more to the front and center. Thanks.
Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Koo. This was a question I actually was going to ask earlier, but I think this is a better point. What is this month's update on when this plan might kick off and when it might be finished?
Sorry, I'm just gonna wait 1 second as my staff lets me know, because I know that
Sure.
the RFP was and there we are. There's you see Ozzy Arce, our senior transportation planner, who's leading the effort.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. Just a quick update. The RFP is out now for consultants to view and submit proposals, which are due the middle of November. We're hoping to have interviews in early December and onboard the consultant early next year to kick off the project in early of 2023. So appreciate your patience to get to this point, but I do think these two efforts align.
Okay, and remind us how long we anticipate the process taking.
It's we scoped it for about an 18 to 24 month process.
Okay, so the earliest it would be done would be the end of 2024.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. You know, we I'm not sure who on council doesn't know this is going to be really disruptive. I certainly do. I've been talking about it for years. So, and I think as I mentioned last time, I actually know people who plan to move because they live relatively near one of the crossings during this time. So I agree that we need to do, a better job communicating when we get there. I think this really goes to Nadia's earlier statement about how are we going to be making this decision, right? The council criteria, what is construction duration and impact, where does that rank versus cost? Where does it rank versus, ease of travel east-west for every single version of transportation? And frankly, the council has not agreed. We have not come to a decision about how to think about these criteria. And so we continue to have these discussions where everything is important. But I'm aligned with Nadia that at some point we're going to have to decide, are we designing this for cars and making it work for bicycles? Or are we designing it so that every single mode gets equal improvements or reduces impacts? These are really fair questions, and I don't think we've done a great job with them. You don't really need any direction here, right? You already have it.
Correct.
Okay. I think there's everyone is converging at the same place, which is great. That we absolutely have to have a way to get across this. I know Arnaud's had his hand up for some time, and sure at some point we'll get to public comment, and then we can go back and revisit any of these things we need to handle differently. But I think one of the important points made is that we can't have really long detours, and I think we all know that sort of instinctively, but that might be one of the sort of secondary principles we could come up with as we think about managing through the construction impacts. Thank you.
Nadia?
So since this is the part about construction impacts, I guess I'll put it in here because it doesn't seem to be an obvious space. As you guys remember, at our last meeting, we had Caltrain here, and I was personally super excited to hear them say that construction methods should be considered as part of design. And so just thinking about the construction impacts and having watched the video of how this would get built prior to coming to this thing, I was reminded of just how awful it is to have the sets of shoe fly tracks and how long that construction would be and all of that. And so just want to remind the committee that we should revisit the idea of the jacked box and how that construction method might fundamentally change the length of time that this takes. And the reason we have to lean into this alternative potentially more than the other alternatives is, as a reminder, this is the only alternative where if we have to have 4 tracks, we are not impacted. Because if you have to have a viaduct, you got to add 2 more tracks. If you have to have a hybrid, it's 2 more tracks. If you have a trench, it's 2 more tracks. But with the underpass, we're not moving the train. And that is very significant. And lastly, I'll just remind everyone again that the whole point of this thing is to make life better when this is over. And this is the only alternative that doesn't make us have worse traffic studies. And so I know that the bike ped interfacing with the cars is really hard, and we should, it's going to take us a long time to work out all these details, and it's hard to be really patient. But this is one of the alternatives that probably will have the least impacts and will leave us in the best day afterwards, after spending, however many millions of dollars. And so whatever we have to do to get to that point and balance the bikes and the peds and the cars, we should try to do.
And I also want to just remind the rail committee that Caltrain staff did say they would come present on jackboxing and construction techniques. And we got some, not a scheduled, but we did receive confirmation from them that they would.
That's awesome, because that was my next question. So you anticipated it. Thank you.
And also to add to that is, as part of the geotechnical study, we are looking at specifically in Palo Alto, how does that works out. So
wonderful. Next.
All right, I'm going to speak to this slide, and this is the one Councilmember Cormac was referring to, where we're presenting for the Meadow Charleston underpass alternatives that we consider a bike path on on each side of the roadway, compared to the alternative that's on the table, where we are have it on one side of the roadway. There's an example here that we've shared of Paseo Padre Parkway in Fremont that has that configuration, which is pretty traditional. And we'd have paths on both sides of the roadway that would eliminate the needs for those for bikes and peds to cross the streets and at multiple times, as well as the need for some of those flashing beacons that we were discussing earlier. Similar to the current underpass study, that alternative that we're looking at, there are some turning movements that would not be possible at the intersection of Alma due to the elevated sidewalks with this alternative, if we have sidewalks on both sides. Obviously, to develop this alternative, it has significant geometric changes. So we're requesting direction from Rail Committee on whether a new alternative should be developed with this configuration.
And also to add to that is that this was in a recent letter that was received by the committee from Payback. This was one of the most emphasized point that they like to see sidewalk on both sides of our bike facility and pedestrian facilities on both sides of the street. So just wanted to note that.
So separated is what you're saying.
Separated and on both sides, yes.
Okay, Councilmember Cormac.
Thanks. So I jumped the gun on this a little bit, but I appreciate staff coming forward with this. One of the things we haven't talked yet about is having people walking and people on wheeled things at the same time and separating them so we don't have 4 different sets of issues in one place, which is what the prior version has. I think it's beyond wise. I just feel like it's going to be necessary. So I think the other thing that happens here, and we haven't talked about it, looks like the grade is already improved, right? Because it doesn't have to go down as far as the cars do. So I realize this comes with additional costs. This to me is an example of, as we work through things, we find things that we need to refine. And this falls squarely in that category. So I'm supportive of us looking at an alternative that allows bikes, people on bikes and people walking to be on both sides of the street in the natural direction of traffic.
Just a point of clarification, using the slide 9, Millette, maybe could you explain exactly what turn movements wouldn't be possible?
Yeah, I can maybe answer that for you. Did you say slide 9?
Yeah, I think that has. Oh, sure. If you've got the overall map, even better. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's take a look at Meadow, for example.
Yeah.
So this right turn movement onto northbound Alma would not be allowed, and conversely on the other side, southbound Alma connecting to Meadow.
But weren't those the ones identified? I mean, we literally added an extra lane there because that traffic movement was so important that's why we added a turn lane. So that southbound Alma making a right onto Meadow serves that entire neighborhood in there.
Right.
And then the movement, if the same thing were to happen on Charleston, I'm assuming you're limiting some pretty significant turn movements at pretty significant intersections.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're not trying to say that it will, from a traffic standpoint, we're not saying it's going to work well, but it's, it's something that we could look into and seeing what can be done to accommodate those movements. Potentially a roundabout similar to Charleston could be implemented. Of course, that's going to require additional property takes or acquisitions, I should say. So I think that's why Millette emphasized that. It's not going to be, from a traffic standpoint, it's not going to look the same. I mean, it's essentially a completely new alternative. In fact, I would also add that implementing this idea is probably more suitable at Charleston because, like you said, Nadia, this is a key element of this design is to have that connectivity with Alma. Whereas on Charleston, I can pull up Charleston real quick. Charleston's a little bit different, where there's only one direct connection to Alma. So this is the one on Charleston that would not be.
And that's literally
permitted.
the most significant traffic movement. It carries almost all the evening commute traffic. So I would just point out that if we were to study this alternative, you shouldn't just look at the design for bikes and peds. You should consider if it's going to significantly worsen traffic, there's almost no point in spending the money to do detailed analysis on something that will literally fail every traffic thing that we have.
Right. So what would happen in this situation here in Charleston is they wouldn't be able to make the direct right. They'd have to enter the roundabout and make the U-turn. Does that require additional lane over here? Probably. Again, we'd have to look at this as a whole and see how it could work.
Yeah, and I think, part of the discussion we've been having today is, you want to prioritize bike peds as well as vehicles. So that's one of these opportunities that you could look at some of that and how you could maybe balance that out. Yeah, we certainly, if we look at the traffic like first brush and it's a no-go, we wouldn't proceed, or we would bring that information back, right?
Yeah, I mean, literally the entire design of this as it was originally proposed was wholly based on the commute movements. And the commute movement is in the morning, people come from Mountain View and at Charleston make a left turn, which we've now put through the roundabout because it makes it a slow and constant go. But in the evening, that reverse commute is that right turn that you're talking about, and blocking that movement seems like it would fail every traffic thing. And I just go back to the whole point of all of these grade separations is to leave us in a better stead, and limiting turning movements at either Meadow or Charleston is almost a non-starter, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Millette just said, it probably makes sense for us to look at it from a general traffic standpoint first before we develop all these exhibits and the refinement of the geometry if it doesn't work from a traffic standpoint. So that would probably be the first step, right? Is to see if does it even work.
And if I can, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but so we have all these comments from the various different stakeholders, including reaching back out to the original designers. And so I want to note that, first of all, thank you very much for all the feedback that we received from everyone. But the original conceptual designer of this, Elizabeth Alexis, her concept had the bike ped path on one side, not on both sides. And the reason for that was for the accommodation of the vehicular traffic as well.
So Pat, do you have anything that you'd like to comment or question on?
I did want to look at, so if on the original design, it looked, I just want to make sure, let's see, I'm trying to, okay. And if you can scroll that upward that way, yes. Okay. Yeah, so if I'm a bicyclist going, we're calling westbound, no, the other way, I'm sorry. If I'm a bicyclist going westbound and I want to go to the, we call it south side of Charleston, I would be able to make a 180 here, right?
That's right. Yeah. So you're coming in this direction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to get to the other side of Charleston, you'd either continue straight like over here and then cross, or if you want to get to Park on this side, on the south side, yeah, you'd have to do a 180 and cross the bridge here.
So
come down the path and get onto Park. Which
is not so bad. And if I'm coming from the other direction, from the west, from Gunn High School, say, in the afternoon, and I want to get to the other side of Alma, I'd go and take the reverse of the same route.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You again go on this bridge here, come down, do a 180. And get on.
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear whoever's speaking right now.
Yep, we got a mic now.
My apologies. Keep forgetting about the mic. Yeah, so from, if you're heading in the eastbound direction as a bicyclist and you want to get to the other side of the tracks, you would continue along here, along this path here, across the bridge, and then travel in the opposite direction, do a 180, and then this would descend underneath the tracks and underneath Alma Street and allow you to get to Mumford and beyond.
Yeah, and then, so then we've maybe got 2 points of reference. One is what would be the ideal bike and ped flow, which would be probably both directional movements on each side of Charleston. But the other point of comparison is to what we have now. And right now, we have one directional on each side of the road, interrupted by a signal and a train crossing. So I think it would be helpful for us to do those two comparisons. A reference point of how much better is this from a bicyclist standpoint than what we have today, and how much less ideal is it versus the if we had two directional on both sides of the street. And yeah, I just think that that's a useful and important point of reference.
To clarify, is better would be like delay perspective, like timing? Like
yeah, if on an average, I guess that's probably the most quantifiable metric is on average, what would be your time of travel if you're trying to go each direction by bike. And then qualitatively just describing the inconvenience or whatever, or greater convenience, whichever it may be. But I get why we would ideally want to have bidirectional on each side. But then when I started thinking about this and going, well, how does it compare to today? And I think it's a lot better, but I'd like to know that besides my own kind of visceral notion. And lastly, have we looked at any other dedicated crossings for the long term south of Charleston for bike and ped? Because we have a long stretch from there to San Antonio, and San Antonio doesn't really lend itself to a good crossing even. So all the way into Mountain View, where bikes and peds don't have a good dedicated crossing. And I thought that we had at one time in the bike ped master plan a reference to that. In the current plan, would it be? Nadia, do you know?
I think it was in the Rail Committee's
that's
2013
it.
report, and I don't remember if it was at Adobe or at Fern.
Yeah, Ripon thinks it was Adobe.
Yes, I believe there's also a council direction to look at in South Palo Alto, including Adobe for bike ped transportation plans.
So then when we look at this issue, should we be coupling it with looking at a long-term dedicated bike and ped crossing somewhere in the vicinity of Adobe? And then the concern on the two ways on each side really wouldn't be such a problem, because it's all those people who live in those neighborhoods south of Charleston, east of Alma, who are struggling with this maneuvering. And as we're long-term really trying to open up the connectedness on the two sides of the tracks, in particular in South Palo Alto, which doesn't have grade separations for bikes and peds today at any location. This is something that we should be having, I think, in our long-term plan. See, that's thanks.
Councilmember Cormack.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to say I appreciate what the comments about traffic, and I assume staff would do that. And if it's an absolute non-starter, okay. But I definitely think it's worth spending a little bit of time on. And I think it's not, it's possible we could do it at one, right? Maybe we could do it at Meadow and not Charleston, or Charleston, not Meadow. It's not necessarily we'd have to do it at both, but I guess if you just think about the friction of the back and forth and you read the super detailed comments, just because something's possible doesn't mean that it would be used. So I really want to encourage us not to give up yet on making it, really understandable and seamless and straightforward for people. Thanks.
That makes me realize one other follow-up. This 180 turn that we would be having on the north side of Charleston, the west side of the tracks. Yes. Let's see if we can. At Embarcadero, when you come westbound under the underpass, that's exactly what we do in front of Trader Joe's. I do that turn virtually every day. It needs a little bit better, bigger radius by about 5 feet. And other than that, it's a really viable approach. And I was having trouble visualizing it until I realized I do that every day, almost identical. And when I think about that, it's not very inconvenient at all. And so that kind of changes my thinking when I have that point of reference.
This is the location here you're referring to, is that right?
Yeah, I'm not in a picture, but yeah.
Right over here.
Yeah.
If you were, you'd have to have your helmet on.
Yeah, I do always. And
Yeah,
my light.
We were just talking about this location the other day with our traffic consultant.
Let's see, Peter, if you could go back to the slide you were just looking at for Charleston. Yeah. I want to just pick up on the mayor's comment by noting the one difference, I think, between this concept and what we have at Embarcadero is you will have a shoulder, right, as you proceed, which obviously is not the case on Embarcadero today, which for the more aggressive cyclists makes it more likely that rather than do the 180, you just barrel through the tunnel or the underpass, as the case may be. Not recommending it, but you could.
So I have a question on the same diagram. So coming from Gunn High School, can you show me how they're gonna access to the brown part to get to that, to cross the road, to cross Alma? Yeah, Gunn is down here. So it just goes.
Oh, yeah, you had to say yes again. Sorry, we lost our Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
I just got a prompt. So you probably got it. Still connecting.
While you're pulling up the map, if I could just comment on what Mayor Burt was saying in terms of figuring out the discomfort for the bikes. I will just point out that in the hybrid, because this is something XCAP discussed at length, in the hybrid and in the viaduct, you would essentially still wait every time at Alma for the light. And so even though you're removing the train situation that you have today, that light impact is pretty significant, especially at different parts of rush hour. And it also impedes the road traffic. It's part of why those intersections, even once you build a viaduct or a hybrid in the future traffic studies, still get an F as an intersection because of that interruption from the bikes and peds.
While you're doing that, I just thought I'll just add that I would like to see that the bike and ped not be only on one side, but on both sides. But at the same time, I think that we have to recognize that East Meadow is not the same width as Charleston. So that has to be taken into consideration. Then at the same time, you know, at the intersections with all the money and all the work that is going to be done, at all these intersections, the flow should definitely be improving, and that we shouldn't settle for something that is similar or the same as what we have now. So I just wanted to add that comment in. And I on pulling back that diagram up on Charleston, I just kind of want to understand and have a visual of how you would cross Alma when you're coming from Gunn High School.
Your gun is to the west, is that right?
To the west, that's correct.
Okay, let me see if I can explain this one. So as a bicyclist coming from Gunn, you travel down Charleston over here. You would veer, there would be somewhat of a decision to make here where the profile starts to descend down for Charleston. So you would bear right and stay at grade along the frontage. Let me zoom in a little bit, it's hard to see. There we go, that's a little bit better. So you would bear right here along this, and then you take enter the pedestrian path right here.
I see now.
And then you would, again, this is essentially at grade, maybe rising slightly, and then cross the bridge.
Okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
That entry.
Yeah, it's hard to
because
see.
it looked like you just turn onto that road and onto park and say, so where are they going? Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
it's very hard to visualize three-dimensionally because there's different things going on. This is starting to descend down underneath the tracks. And then on the right here, it's also purple, but it's just new pavement at grade. So these are different elevations here, these two arrows, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
And just to add that in our future design plans, when we progress on it, we will have signing and striping that will make it more clear and how that will be accommodated. So definitely it's very preliminary at this time, but additional details will make it more clear.
That'll be great. Thank you. Okay, next.
Yeah, I think we're back to the Kellogg seal slide that we were wanting to get to. And anyway, there is consideration for ped bike undercrossing at Seal, as was suggested by the stakeholders. This graphic just shows that, you know, Kellogg is closer to Churchill and Poly High School, but Seal is across from Pierce Park, which many have mentioned has the offers more flexibility for access ramps on the west side. And council has already provided direction on this, that the merits of this undercrossing should be studied, and that will be done as part of the bike and pedestrian transportation plan that's been mentioned earlier by Ripon.
And once that update is available, so once that update is available, whatever the results of that study and the council approval would be, we would incorporate it in grade separation accordingly.
So this goes to this an issue that we've discussed at our last couple rail committee meetings, which is that we've been notified by our federal and state legislators and VTA and Caltrain as well, that we're in a circumstance of unprecedented availability of funding for active transportation measures like this. And it's not going to be around very long. We don't know exactly how long. But if we take a couple years more to do this, and our bike and ped plan is about a year and a half, 2 years behind its launch, and we don't know when it'll be complete. It hasn't been started yet. But if we wait for that whole process before we decide whether we want to prioritize pursuing a bike and or ped crossing like this one and like in the vicinity of Loma Verde, we could lose out on a really critical opportunity. We've really been encouraged to move aggressively on this. And that goes then to the issue of how can we move forward a tentative intention to pursue at least preliminary designs on a couple of these before we've got the whole bike and ped plan designed and moved through council approval, because the two are not well aligned right now, and I'm not convinced that we have to go through that that process strictly. So, I mean, the Loma Verde vicinity one was already referenced in the previous bike and ped plan. So I'm still kind of scratching my head why we can't be doing any preliminary design based on the last design. And now that we have these huge funding sources, along with a recognition that we very good chance we need to build bike and ped crossings before we shut down vehicular ones for construction. So I, again, I don't want to accept that framing. I want us to move forward with decisions on this. If we need to peel this off and go to payback and some community outreach ahead of a completion of the whole bike and ped plan, if it's part of the launch of the bike and ped plan, but right at the outset that we try to focus on this, whatever is the mechanism that will allow us to move forward more quickly on these bike and ped crossings is what I really want to see done. And then aside from that, we don't have kind of the details on the seal that we had on Kellogg for today. Is that because the design is so similar that, or just that we've put the
Yeah, I mean, that's not part of our work to look at seal.
It's
right at
not.
this point.
Oh, so
Yeah.
we're looking at Kellogg, not seal.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that happen?
Because Kellogg was associated with the church.
So was seal.
XCAP recommended seal, but it wasn't something, we ran out of time and money, right?
So XCAP did recommend seal. So I don't know how exactly Kellogg got, I know that both were being evaluated, and somehow Kellogg trumped seal in the process. And I'm still at a loss to find the merits for Kellogg over seal. That I'm not closed-minded to that, but I've been looking at this for several years and I just haven't seen the case for Kellogg over seal. And it's more constrained than seal. So it's both less valuable and more difficult to build. And that's where we're putting our priority. And we're saying that we can't really prioritize looking at these other things because they have to go through the bike and ped master plan, although Kellogg didn't. This doesn't make sense to me. I don't think we've got our priorities right on where we're focusing among these two. If we had to make a choice, in my mind, it's seal. And if we were able to move Kellogg ahead of the bike and ped master plan, then we ought to be able to move seal ahead of the bike and ped master plan, especially since it's already in the existing one.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you. Apologies, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you done there?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I think actually you're absolutely correct that we do not need to wait for the bike and ped master plan to complete in order to have information about what would be a better choice, seal or Kellogg. And I think, you know, we're trying to reach out to and noting that we've been trying for a little while to get the dot maps from PAUSD. We have gotten some in the past, so we're trying to get those dot maps. We think that would be really helpful in deciding. I think a lot of the information that was shared earlier today related to Kellogg and seal, or I should say related to Kellogg, are really applicable to seal, things like the width of the path and all that, because the geometries are the same of the streets. Where we have more flexibility is on the other side, which is Pierce Park, because we don't have and as many concerns in the you know, with the school bleachers or whatever on the other side. So we do have a park on the other side. So I do think you're correct that there's merits. I think that it's something that we will be able to identify and not need to necessarily wait till the very end of the bike and ped plan in order to have more information on.
And is seal width the same as Kellogg? It is? Okay.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I don't want to speak incorrectly. I think they're nearly the same. I'm not sure if they're identical.
Yeah, I visited both sites. I just took a tape measure or pasted off. I believe they're both about 36 feet wide.
So very, very close to the same.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think also seal is goes further east, right? I mean, where it starts off is past Middlefield, so the connectivity towards Pierce Park and across Alma and
I live in Old Palo Alto, so Seal is the only street that goes all the way from Alma past Newell. So it is a major thoroughfare. It was one of the things that was identified in the previous bike plan as being upgraded to a higher class of bike boulevard, whatever that is. And yes, it is such a direct connection that was part of the conversation, was making Seal into a better bike east-west connector.
And Kellogg goes three blocks and runs in the Embarcadero that's running diagonal to it.
so definitely, I think seal is something worth looking at and not put behind Kellogg, which brings me back to, I apologize,
Sorry.
Okay, I'll get back to Councilmember Cormack. I just want to get back to Charleston and Meadow. If this seal can be studied ahead of time, not towards the end of BPTP, I think also East Meadow and Charleston might warrant the same, given, is it Loma Verde or? Well, an alternative way of getting people across, simply because we want to make sure that that is also available when construction takes place. So I know we're not there yet, apologies, but Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Koo. So, we've had versions of this conversation multiple times. So I will say again that for Loma Verde, if you want to use that as an example, the bike improvements were never made on Loma Verde. They were removed from the plan. So I don't think staff is not doing something that we've asked them to do. The council removed Loma Verde from the plan, Ross Road stayed, and so we don't have a setup for this. I don't know what the right answer is for Kellogg and Seal, but I think the Loma Verde example is one that indicates why this has to be done in conjunction with the plan. I get that it's late and that's a bummer, and we might miss out on some federal funds, but it looks like the federal funds aren't for sure anyway. We can see that with the grant that we just didn't receive. It doesn't mean we won't get others. I know it's hard to wait, but I believe we want to do this correctly, and our most recent efforts have not been integrated, and so they haven't succeeded. So I think it's incumbent upon us to, painful as it is, continue to wait to do the process correctly. And then we're going to figure out where are the right places. Pretty sure didn't council at some point remove Seal Avenue? This was before my time. I remember there was some discussion about that at some point. So that's where I am. I know it's hard to wait, but I think we have to have it integrated with the entire plan. Otherwise, we're just building something that isn't going to be used in the right way.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that I think the Seal Kellogg discussion is something that can be addressed early on in BPTP. It's how we set it up. The community engagement is happening at the very beginning. So we're going to be seeking input from the community members on not just this, but the network connectivity issues throughout the thing, throughout the city initially. So I want to reiterate that. And then one more comment I wanted to mention the discussion about funding, to note that I think we have another 5 years of this elevated level of federal funding that we'll be able to apply for. So we do anticipate that while we've been applying for federal funding, Ripon provided the update initially, and we're continuing to apply. We don't anticipate that we are going to, we're going to miss out on opportunities to apply. That said, I just want to mention, as you know, was provided to the council members that, you know, this first round of funding that they received, I can't remember what it was, like 11 times or 17 times the amount of funding requests that they had funding for the programs. And only one project in California was actually a Caltrans project in San Diego that got awarded. And so I'm not saying that there's not a chance that we get awarded. I think it's definitely worth our time applying for some of these funding opportunities, but it's also not a guarantee.
To answer Councilmember Cormack, in I think it was 2017, when there was a different consultant and we were trying to move quickly, and there was considerations of closing streets without really having done traffic studies. The consideration of between Kellogg and Seal was discussed, and there was a council member who lives on Seal but further away who actually voted to remove it. And that's how it was removed. So when we started the public outreach, the alternative immediately came back. And I will just say that when you guys are thinking about looking at the merits of Seal versus Kellogg, this map is deceiving because it's only really looking at the distance from the intersection at Churchill. And if you were to turn the image 90 degrees and look and pull back the lens, you'll see that Embarcadero runs at an angle and it creates this kind of triangle. And so North Palo Alto at that point is a triangle of which I think the dot maps would be super helpful. By the way, this is the first time I'm hearing that we had dot maps. XCAP would have requested those a long time ago. So I just want to say, as a fan of dots. Kellogg from that point is only a block and a half, not even 2 full blocks to the Embarcadero intersection, because you've got Melville and then literally Kingsley, but Kingsley is a very short street. So it's very short. But viewing the map this way, it's deceiving to understand the distance.
So just to follow up on a couple of things, I do recall that that process by which the council had acted on Seal. This was a council that was in office up to 2018. We're now 2022, but the XCAP recommended Seal. So subsequent to that, we've had a recommendation that was for Seal, and I think the right one. Also regarding Loma Verde, it wasn't removed from the bike and ped master plan. It was it was lumped into the NVCAP process, if I recall. Nadia, do you?
So a couple of things. One is, I just want to correct you. The Seal, the XCAP technically voted on a majority to close Churchill, but they did say that you should look at whether there should be a crossing at Seal or a crossing at Kellogg when we were talking about having one preliminarily for construction. The folks that voted in the minority, including me, said if you were going to go with the partial underpass, which is what the council has since decided, you should definitely look at Seal. So I just want to clarify that. Loma Verde came at a point when the NVCAP was launching, yes, and you guys voted to have that be included as part of that thing. And then it was removed from XCAP altogether and we never got to talk about it again.
But that was because the NVCAP area was envisioned as needing and being a great opportunity for a through bike and pedestrian route that would be designed as part of a master plan for that area. It wasn't because Loma Verde bike and ped overpass or underpass was deemed to be undesirable. It was because it was in fact thought to be needed to be integrated with another master planning process. And that's quite different from that it was dropped from the plan. It simply wasn't dealt with. It was transferred from the XCAP process to the NVCAP process.
If I could just, oh, sorry, are you done?
Just one other thing on the funding. I just want to clarify that my understanding is that, yes, we have unprecedented state and federal dollars for grade separations, but there are other funds that are in addition to that for active transportation crossings like this. And that's what, in fact, VTA and Caltrain and Senator Becker's staff all said when we were pushing them for additional funds for our major grade crossings, essentially vehicular crossings, they said, yeah, but you need to really look at if you're looking at the possibility of segregated bike and ped crossings, those are other big dollar sources, and you need to be pursuing those aggressively. And while the federal infrastructure dollars are over a 5-year period, the state ones are not necessarily on the same time frame, and I'm less versed on that. But it's not the same. My understanding is it's not an identical bucket of funds, and there are state considerations on dollars as well as the federal considerations. And that's why VTA, Caltrain, and Senator Becker's office all pushed us to pursue these bike and ped crossing dollars separate from our other grade separation dollars, said it's a real opportunity time and they would support us on that.
Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Ku. Just on Loma Verde, I think it's important that we separate the road from any potential under or overcrossing. My understanding, council staff, somebody in I think it must have been 16, I'm not sure exactly when, removed. The plan was Loma Verde and Ross Road, both roads. And the Loma Verde part was removed from that was part of the plan, but it was not done. It was taken out of what was going to be implemented because of objections from residents. Sorry, you can hear my dog. She wants dinner. So I just think we need to separate that, the road part, which was taken out of the plan and was not implemented, from any potential crossing that might happen in the future.
Well, so with that, I kind of want to clarify, since we're still on the Seal Avenue, on the slide, it says council direction to study the merits of a bike ped undercrossing at Seal versus Kellogg. But we're doing both, right? Or are you asking for us to pick one over the other?
No, just noting that was the prior council direction, was to study the merits of the bike ped crossing at Seal versus Kellogg, in order to select one of those as the location for the Churchill grade separation bike ped movement.
But at this time, we are doing both, studying both.
So at this time, for the grade separation project, Kellogg remains as is until the study is complete and we get the direction otherwise. That's our assumption of how we are proceeding with.
Okay, very good.
Just one follow-up. So I concur with Councilmember Cormack that there were issues on basically the bike route, we'll call it east of Alma, whether there was the study back in 2015-16 on whether we could use the Matadero Creek corridor there. I think that's what it is. Yeah. And that's where we had community pushback and other issues. Loma Verde had its own questions, including whether you should dump all the bikes on a street that actually is almost an arterial. Versus another alternative, which is El Carmelo, and have some restricted movements like we have on Bryant, and it's not a regular vehicular route, and could be one where we tend to have just local traffic of cars combined with bikes. And that remains to be determined, but that's my memory of the history of that. That influences a design on a bike and ped crossing, exactly where we might locate the connecting streets, and that would be a consideration. But that's my memory of the history of that.
Actually, council deliberated very carefully on saying in the vicinity of Loma Verde to not exactly select a specific seat. I remember it was like a back and forth iteration.
That's right, to keep it open.
Okay, we can go to the next one.
Awesome. So we're going to change gears here a little bit. We've been talking a lot about the ped bike facilities, but we're going to focus a little bit on some of the roadway facilities here. And, just as a point of reference, a standard lane width is 12 feet and, what we consider a minimum lane width is 10. And in this case, we are recommending that these lanes, the 12-foot lanes, be reduced to 11-foot lanes, but the shoulders to remain the 8 feet. The shoulder width here provides space for bicyclists and disabled vehicles and other infrastructure, such as drainage inlets and signs. In addition, the shoulder provides space for turning movements for emergency vehicles.
Okay. Any questions? Any additions, comments? No? Wow. Next. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair Koo, I do have my hand up.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't see
No,
you.
that's no
Go
worries.
ahead.
We just go back. And there's no other change. So we're just narrowing the width of the entire construction project.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Just a lane, right?
It's just a foot of
Just-
each
oh,
lane,
yeah.
right? So 2 feet total.
So
Okay.
instead of 12, it's 11.
Correct.
Yeah, there were several comments from Payback community as well as some other the community design engineers to narrow the footprint and reduce that would help reduce the cost as well as there was an issue about the bike lane the shoulders as well as the lane widths. So lane widths was something that we could easily include, and shoulders does keep the flexibility, so we like to maintain it as.
And then will there be parking on that street?
No, this is
Yeah,
the
this is-
pass portion.
Oh, this is the underpass portion. I see. Okay.
So is it also true that when you narrow the lanes, that's likely to slow people down? A
Correct.
little? Okay.
That does helps in some speed reductions. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, the next one that we want to talk about is we received some stakeholder feedback about modifying the traffic lanes. For instance, we were asked if lanes could be reduced for the Churchill partial underpass, such that 2 northbound lanes from Alma Street and the 2 eastbound lanes from at Churchill, if those could be reduced or left out. We are recommending that the lane configurations remain as proposed because this is consistent with our traffic study recommendations. And this could also be further confirmed in subsequent phases of the project if needed.
I just want to clarify. So when you're going to Alma, the 2 lanes, one is going to downtown and the other one is going south, right? Right. Okay.
So the thought or
Show
the
the plan.
was that if we reduce the number of lanes, that would reduce the bridge span, and that would also reduce the bridge thickness and other things. So that was the thought process from the design engineers who were recommending to remove, but the elimination of the right turn lane could back up traffic on Churchill Avenue. So at this time, we were the recommendation was to continue as the configuration proposed.
Yeah, I'd like to add, there was a little bit of sensitivity also with the property on this corner at Mariposa. So I think it was Michael Price who made the comment like, hey, do we really need 2 lanes here approaching Alma? Can we just have the 1? Again, we're recommending that we keep this configuration as is based on our feedback from our traffic engineer.
Can you pull up the aerial view of this? And
The existing or the map or the plan?
yeah.
You want like a Google map or you want?
Well,
what do you want?
I can tell you what I'm aiming for, and maybe you'll
Okay.
select a better one. So coming southbound on Alma, and blowing that up maybe. Why do we have, it looks like we have 2 lanes. Is that correct? Or no, is it truly 2 lanes? When that previous view that you had, it looked like there were 2 lanes.
Yeah, the view we're just looking at was over here, looking
Okay.
this way on Churchill.
But then it's 1 lane with a big shoulder on Churchill, as you turn right onto Churchill, as you're going southbound on Alma. So there's that wide shoulder, as it's southbound on Alma, and then you turn right onto Churchill.
Correct. Yeah.
And then there's that big shoulder there on Churchill. Why is that shoulder so wide? And if the issue was trying to narrow the Churchill underpass, is that an area that could be given up?
We have another slide on that, don't we? Isn't that coming up?
Yeah, I don't know if we have another slide. That one in particular. Well, we have a slide about the design vehicle turning movements, not necessarily at this location, but that's why the shoulder is so wide here, is to accommodate a turning movement for a fire truck.
But that has to do with the radius on the corner there.
Right.
So if we adjust the radius, do we need the underpass to be so wide?
Yeah, because the underpass is so close to that turning movement. I mean, it wouldn't make sense to try to reduce the span. Let me see if I could draw it. I mean, the edge of the vehicle is kind of like this. So, we just squared off the structure to clear that. I don't know if I'm explaining that too well.
Well, the property on Mariposa that Mike Price was concerned about is beyond where you squared it.
Oh, okay.
So if you scroll that up a little bit, so we see more west.
Michael was wanting to eliminate this right turn lane if possible, so that we could shift everything to the left or to the north, so that there'd be less impact to this property.
So I'm wondering if you could shift it a bit to the left by eliminating that unnecessary shoulder there.
So, the striping is not necessarily how the vehicles drive. So this striping is mostly for a car vehicular, so regular passenger cars, but the emergency vehicles and the buses will go over that shoulder area. That's kind of.
So you're talking about the center median?
No, on
the left,
on the left,
shoulder,
in the shoulder area. So they're overhang and.
Okay, but how much? I mean, it really looks still wider.
The edge of the vehicle, roughly, the right edge of the vehicle making the right will kind of follow this path.
So then
roughly.
by where you have the right there, where you have the end of your red line.
Right.
If at that point in time, the underpass is narrowed, then it basically frees up some real estate, where right now, what Mike Price was talking about is on the south side there by Mariposa. Is there any potential to shift over the underpass a few feet and make it narrower from that location out toward El Camino?
Yeah, and I would say the real calibration of the foot by foot would be in the preliminary engineering design. And when we go into the more design, we are going to make sure that the offset to the curve is there.
Well, if we simply put out, rather than try and design it now, but put that as a question and an objective to not have the underpass wider than is necessary for both cost reasons and land taking reasons. And to try to optimize basically minimize the shoulder and for that matter, the median. I don't know whether that can be reduced further.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that objective will definitely be.
I mean, right now we have no median. And we have those same vehicles that have to make that right turn. And maybe it's not even compliant to current standards, but the current circumstance is a similar radius with no median and a narrow bike lane on the road there. And that's the width of that in that area. And this is considerably wider, and we're looking at building that. Now, maybe there are reasons that it has to be, but those aren't apparent to me yet.
Yes, that definitely will be considered in the next, when we look at the bridge design, the span length as well, and with the support systems that is required. So right now, in this particular case, the support is shown, like the median is to provide for the center support to the bridge.
Oh, it's a center support median.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So once we get into the more detailed design of the bridge and the design type and the bridge type selection and all the structural loading, live loading, dead loading, all of that stuff, then we would be able to see what kind of actual.
That's right. And the question of how wide it needs to be at that where the tracks are crossing and you have the center support versus whether you more rapidly truncate it so that the ramp from the west side is not as wide as it is currently designed or drawn.
Correct.
It funnels down quicker. And that's the property in question on the south side there. So I don't know, but I'd like to see us look at optimizing that if possible.
I think that your comment makes sense. I think that's really something that we could take into the next phase of design for this project. I just want to also acknowledge that one of the comments that we received from PAUSD was to make certain that their buses can make these turning movements. So I just want to acknowledge that in the comments here because they want to be able to make those turning movements safely with the school buses.
Agreed, and we need to make it at least as accommodating as it is today. This looks significantly more so, but I'm not certain of that.
Yeah, I just realized one other thing too. It's not just the right turn movement, it's also the left turn movement to allow for the bus fire truck to make that turn. I'd have to go back and look and see. Because I was showing this black dash being, maybe that would be the potential layout of the bridge support and the retaining wall, but that may not be possible.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just
no, it's fair
want
comment.
to pursue optimization. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Thanks.
Nadia.
So a couple of things. One is, if I forwarded to council last night the picture of what Rengstorff looks like. So Rengstorff's bridge has looks a lot like the San Francisco Creek Bridge, where you've got those trusses along the top, which allow you not to need a center support. So, I mean, one obvious thing is to just remove the center support altogether, which gives lots of clearance for buses to make their turns. I think another thing that Mike Price is highlighting, which I think is important, is the red arrow that Peter drew on the diagram, which is that right turn go all the time. So currently that serves an important function because the traffic kind of stops there, first because of the train, but then also because it's a three-way light, which, by the way, doesn't really make a lot of sense because a lot of people don't turn left on Churchill when you're going southbound Almas. I live in that neighborhood, so that lane is almost always empty. And it was something that was an anomaly in the traffic study. We saw that it was a barely used movement. That is exactly how this idea came forth, to not continue to the other side. But by leaving this right turn lane, now that you won't have a train interrupting it, you're going to get the same thing we get nowadays, where people sneak up on the right side and kind of go into where the bikes are supposed to be, and then try to just keep going right all the time, which sounds like it would be good, except if these folks now traveling southbound Alma are coming downhill. So you can't really see around that corner to see those people now inching to make that right turn. So there's a safety question there about, well, if this is going to be a light that controls that, do you really want to allow those right turn movements in a place which would actually have an impeded sight line since you're lower?
And I'll just follow up. I had forgotten about the Rengstorff and Mountain View design, where my understanding is that they have a design without a center support, and it's a longer span than what we're looking at here. And the Caltrain has preliminarily approved that. Is that correct?
That is correct. We've done the design work for that, but it did take a lot of back and forth to get that buy off.
But now that they bought it on a longer span.
Correct, but it was a lot of geometry finagling that we had to do to get that to agree to.
But this goes to part of what we're working with Caltrain on, is updating their design standards so that we don't have to go through the exception process so much.
Yeah, and this was not an exception. It was trying to figure out a way where we could, in the future, they will have 4 tracks there. So we wanted to have the bridge structure so that they could also in the future still build the other two without impacting all the things that would be built there. So there was a lot of back and forth to get them, to agree to that type of structure and all of
But
that.
it's still good that they have now agreed to that.
Right, but it's not a rubber stamp everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Well, that's, we can have a preliminary discussion with them easily and just see whether they would have objections on this shorter span. Now that they've done that, is this a big issue or a little issue?
Right. And, at Rainstorf, when we tackled that was when we got to 35% design, right? When we entered that, because then you're going to do your type selection and decide what kind of bridge type you're going to use. So that was where we went into that detail.
But this discussion we've had with Caltrain is that we need to get in a process where we don't have to take an alternative, take it to a 35% design, figure out it won't work, or not pursue it to a 35% design because it's not part of their standard design criteria. That's a broken process. That's very expensive. It's time consuming. I had this discussion all the way up to the CEO of Caltrain, and they are very receptive to moving forward with attempting to adjust their design standards on construction methods like this would be, as well as other design and engineering standards. They aren't there yet, but in principle, they agree that that's appropriate and they're receptive to it.
This is probably a good moment for me to mention that Caltrain is hoping to come to the next meeting to discuss a service agreement, which they would like to use as a vehicle to look at our and look at things like this and look at our current alternatives.
Okay, before we continue, this has been going, we're 10 minutes before 4. And I do want to recognize, we have members of the public who might be interested in providing some points. And so I'm just wondering if we should listen to the public now, so to my colleagues, or should we try to finish this? Because there's a lot more to finish.
There's 12 more slides in the packet in the presentation. But usually we go to 4. So I do feel we've already had someone drop off and send an email because they weren't able to provide their comments.
Right, I saw that too.
So I agree with you. We should take public comment.
If I might, Chair, just want to note a couple of things. One is, with apologies, I will need to leave at 4.
Yeah.
Also, if it be interest of the committee, we could carry this over to the next meeting at an appropriate point.
I would agree. Yes. Councilmember Cormack?
That's fine.
Okay, so why don't we go to public comments, Madam Clerk? And I apologize to the members of the public.
All right, Ms. Chair, Mr. Richard Swent is our first speaker and he's in person.
Okay, so I am a member of the Payback Railgrade Crossing Subcommittee. I'm here on their behalf today. We sent you an email. It came from Bruce Arthur. And there's so much ground to cover here. And we're limited in time. So let me just thank you for soliciting all our feedback and for apparently reading all the comments and attempting to address them. And I'm not going to go into all the details here. Let me just say one thing that I've heard from a couple of council members today: simplicity benefits safety. And these underpass designs are very complicated. That makes it very, very difficult to design them safely. So let's just keep that in mind going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Croft, and she's also in person.
Hello, thanks. I am the Safe Routes to School rep for Escondido Elementary and also live in Southgate. And so I just really wanted to emphasize the prioritization of student safety and even convenience, but overall safety over the level of service of cars. I really am happy to hear all the people in this room emphasize how important bicycling and walking is in the community. And to me, that's super important for the long-term health of our community. In our community, there are kids coming from all over Palo Alto since we have the Spanish immersion program. So we have kids that are zoned in there, but we also have kids coming from far away. We've been long-term bikers. My son's in 5th grade. There are kids that come through the California tunnel, but there are also kids on south of Oregon Expressway who will not ride their bikes because there's no safe way to get across Oregon and then get through the California tunnel and then come over to Escondido. So one of the things I just wanted to mention is there's this debate about Kellogg versus Seal, but in my opinion, there should be safe bike crossings all throughout Palo Alto. I mean, I know we're in these budget, we're worried about cost, but if we want to look at the long-term health of the community, we should be considering Kellogg and Seal. And south of Charleston, there should be frequent crossings. And another question, I've paid more attention to Churchill because that's where I live. But as I look at the Meadow and Charleston crossings, why are we putting the bikes along with the cars? It just seems so crazy that it just complicates everything to put the bikes right alongside the cars. So I don't know if there are options for separating the crossings from the cars, much like what's happening at Churchill. We're trying to look at Kellogg and Seal. They're away from Churchill. Can we look at other places where you could potentially put a crossing for bicycles that are away from those major Meadow and Charleston thoroughfares? Just separate the bikes from the cars. There are some crossings like that in San Carlos that I've noticed where I work down there, and you could cross the train away from the major road crossings. Like there's just a hole in the train, right? You can walk right through, and it makes it much calmer to cross where there are no cars. So I also just wanted to point out, I think it's super important to get the crossings done before the construction is done for the cars, so that pedestrians can maintain their behavioral, their biking habits while the construction is ongoing. And I think those are all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The rest of the speakers are online. The first speaker is Cedric Pito de la Boujardière. You can speak for up to 3 minutes. I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
Hello, yeah, this is Cedric Pito de la Boujardière. No worries, nobody can pronounce it. Thank you for taking our public comment. For the Kellogg Underpass, I support Arthur's smart idea to move the access ramps to the center of the path east of Pali to avoid crossing conflicts. I ride that path frequently, and I think there would be minimal impacts to the Pali property if some flaring of the path were needed to accommodate this. I was one of the people that's advocated for closing Kellogg to through traffic at Alma, and I saw the issue that was raised about access for emergency vehicles and garbage trucks. So maybe we could consider a sort of soft closure in the sense that private vehicles would not be permitted to enter or exit, but the blockages on the road designed such that emergency vehicles and garbage trucks can pass over the barriers. The advantage of this would be that with the ramp exiting in the middle of the street, there would be fewer vehicle traffic, only the vehicles going to and from the residences along that stretch of the closed road would need to be contended with, and so it would be safer for the bicycles and pedestrians entering and exiting that access ramp. And then on the question of the ramp lengths, so the ADA ramp maximum slope is 1 in 12, which is about an 8.3% slope, and they require that for every 30 inches of rise that there needs to be a level 5-foot landing area. So I'm wondering if your ramp lengths are taking into account these periodic flat landings, which increases the overall length of the needed ramp. And then I'm wondering if the city has done outreach specifically to the owners of the homes which would be encroached upon or destroyed by some of these proposals. I find it interesting that the viaduct option was eliminated because neighbors didn't want to have a 26-foot tall structure set back 50 feet from their backyards. And yet the plans under consideration now eliminate entire houses, and everyone seems fine with that. The viaduct option had much less impacts to pedestrians, bikes, and cars, and shorter and fewer construction impacts. So as to Rich Swent's point, the simpler is safer. I think it's really unfortunate that the viaduct option was dropped. It's clearly much safer, much simpler. Don't have these crazy roundabouts, just completely nuts. And then the 2-lane roundabout at Charleston is dangerous to navigate as a cyclist, and it's dangerous for pedestrians to cross on the west side of the circle. If you could have lanes merge before and diverge after the roundabout, then you could have a single lane circle and a single lane in each direction to cross as a pedestrian. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Yes, thank you. I want to echo the comments of Cedric Leboudier, and also Mayor Burt is, I think, right on. We can eliminate the central post in Churchill by using the same type of bridge is being used at Rangstorff. It's a through girder bridge, and not only does it allow for the elimination of that center support, but it also has a much thinner railhead to bottom of bridge thickness, so that every inch or every foot you can save in bridge thickness entirely reduces the amount of excavation depth required for Alma and Churchill. So that's a huge win, and that's absolutely something that should be pursued. I don't support actually lowering Churchill. I think it was a mistake, as Mr. Leboudier just stated, to eliminate the viaduct. It minimizes construction impacts. It solves the problem of all the soil excavation. It really eliminates a lot of utility relocation impacts, which are huge. Historically, grade separation projects up and down the line have been stymied and delayed by surprise problems and utility relocations. Anytime you dig down, you're asking for trouble and extra expense and lots of schedule delays. At least for south, so for Churchill, for East Meadow and Charleston, no shoe ply would be required. So again, you can construct the viaduct adjacent to the existing tracks. The turning movements, the issue, all these problems you've been wrestling with for the last hour and a half, 2 hours, are essentially eliminated by having a viaduct. No turning movements are blocked. No alternatives are blocked. You still can do dedicated pedestrian bike underpasses separate from the roads if you wish, entirely separate subject when you're doing a viaduct. You also have complete permeability along the viaduct, so that Redwood City is planning to do it across the entire downtown, 7 grade separations essentially, all in a viaduct, and get complete permeability, so that all those bike ped underpasses, you have more flexibility, and you're not you're actually able to tap into potentially usable space underneath the viaduct and open up all kinds of interesting new possibilities for bike ped paths and recreation. As I stated, all traffic movements are allowed. You stay at grade. None of this nonsense of doubling back and very convoluted bike and pedestrian routes, all in service of trying to avoid elevating the track. It seems ridiculous. No property takings with a viaduct, and future quad track is easy to do. You just build new quad tracks next to the existing ones. So, and the only question would be at whose cost that would be, and it should be at Caltrain.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And the final speaker today is Penny Elson. Penny, did you still want to make your comments?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can.
Oh, very good. Sorry, I had some difficulty unmuting for some reason. So just a couple of comments. First being, Want to thank you for the careful attention that you've given to everyone's comments, both today and the written comments that were sent in. And if you haven't yet read the Payback Subcommittee report or letter, I encourage all of you to do that. I think there are some good comments in there as well. And I want to say that just let everyone know that the BPTP, Bicycle Pedestrian Transportation Plan, RFP was only just released, but it is now available for people to look at on the portal. So I recommend that members of the committee do that to see what's actually in there related to this. I haven't even had a chance to do that myself. I chair Payback, and that's one of my to-do items for the next week or so. And then finally, I wanted to talk about grade separations, grade. I used to work on Safe Routes to School, and a 5% grade for very young children who ride small wheels with little legs that are not powerful, with all due respect to our powerfully riding mayor. He's a strong guy and he's a skilled bicyclist, but our little kids are using coaster brakes. They're still learning how to use their brakes. And I have a big concern about the hybrid plan that has both expressway traffic and Charleston Meadow traffic going downhill toward the intersection. We do have elementary school children using those intersections. That's why there's a crossing guard there. And that downhill is very difficult. If you want to see what a hard time little ones have with that kind of grade, you can take a look at the Magical Bridge. Watch a few 5-year-olds riding that thing, and you will see spills. You will see kids losing control because they're small. So you will be, if we do this, just be aware that even with a 5% grade, it's tricky for them. And I think 8% is simply not doable, but on the approach to the expressway, I'm worried about that. And I'm not sure how we solve that problem. And that's all I have to say for today. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. And Chair Koo, there's one more speaker. Is that okay that I add them? Okay. All right. Tony Carrasco, you can unmute and make your comments.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So thank you for this informative session, actually. But there's one thing that I would really stress, and that is that the pedestrians and bicycles have very different geometries. And while we speak about them as bike ped together, I think we really need to separate them. For instance, the length of the distance that a ramp takes is much more intensive or uncomfortable for a pedestrian than for someone on a bike. And so these lengths that we have, to compare them to what they exist right now, we'd like to know in a quantifiable way, how do we measure that we should measure the extended distances that we force pedestrians to go with these configurations that we're thinking about. The second issue is aligning myself with Cedric and with Adrian, that it really doesn't seem to make sense to eliminate the viaduct. I mean, it allows all movements. I think the big issue with the viaduct is that the residents cannot visualize it. They cannot see how far the viaduct is and how landscaping in 2 or 3 years at a much shorter construction time will eliminate most of that visual horror that people are imagining. And so I would really suggest that you ask someone to be able to visualize that buffer in 3 years or 5 years, shorter than the time it'll take to construct the other alternatives. And the inconvenience that we put people to, I think Mayor Burt spoke about it, being able to do it in 6 months versus 6 years is enormous in a construction project. I've been involved with these, and we look at how long things take and so on. So anyway, thank you for listening, and glad to participate. But don't eliminate the viaduct because I think it's the simplest alternative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that's the last speaker, Chair.
Okay, so we're a little bit past 4. I'm gonna take the suggestion and recommendation to continue this to the next meeting. When is the next meeting?
Thank you. I believe that there is a question that will come to the rail committee about 2 different dates. I'm trying to pull them up. Oh, do we have our final date? I think our clerk is saying it's November 30th is our actual date.
If that's possible, it's my understanding that the other parties can do it November 18th or November 30th, and Churchill, I believe, has a conflict on the 18th.
Oh, there we go.
November 18th is a Friday. Was that a date? Yeah. Oh, okay. I can do it from, I'm at the National League of Cities Conference. I can do it from over there remotely. If
But it does seem that November 30th worked for everyone. So I guess it's to your discretion if the 30th would be better.
Councilmember Cormack.
Yeah, I'm checking. The 30th, I can do. What time would it be on the 18th?
So we had proposed the same time, 1:00 p.m.
I could do that. I would have an extremely hard stop at 4.
Is that for the 18th or the 30th?
The 30th, I'm wide open. The 18th is more constrained, but it's doable for me.
And Mayor Burt said he can do the 30th.
I could do the 18th as well.
18th as well. Okay. So we have 2 choices then.
Just noting, if you have your meeting on the 30th, I don't know when you could do the December meeting before you go on break. And if the idea was to talk to Caltrain before the year flips, then you might want to think about scheduling sooner rather than later.
In that case, let's just do the 18th. I'll be remote.
Okay.
When we do that meeting, could I just ask, one of the things we haven't talked about today is on page 38, comment 163 about peak students not being in the design standard. So there isn't time to have that discussion today, but that seems like a really important assumption that has gotten surfaced in this process. And I'd like to be sure that we discuss it.
Can you repeat that number again?
Yes, it's on page 38 of the packet and it's comment 163. And in the staff response, they indicate that they are not designing for obvious reasons that they cite to peak bicycles at the, for example, for Pally. So I just think it's important for us to surface this and talk about it next time.
And Mr. Bhatia nods his head, so we'll have that on the list.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, is there any other comments or questions? If not, adjourned.